Okay. Welcome everyone to the to 2022. Appreciate y'all joining with us. We've reconvened our Saturday privacy sessions and appreciate y'all joining us for that. And again, Harvey has graciously offered to coordinate and moderate these for the year. So very appreciative to that. And just hope everyone had a great holidays and welcome back. So again, these will be posted to YouTube, and we do record the sessions, of course, so that we can do that. For CPE credit, you do receive a half a CPE credit for each 30 minutes of participation. These are meetings, so you can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question or offer up a comment or suggestion. You obviously can utilize chat if you prefer, but it is nice to hear from people and have an interactive discussion as we go forward. So we have several agenda items today for our session that's from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. And again, these occur on the fourth Saturday of every month. And hopefully you receive the calendar invite to add these to your calendar for the year. So that they'll show up every month for you. And we sure appreciate y'all joining and participating in these. And we've gotten a lot of really good feedback on the Saturday privacy sessions. And of course, in large part, that's due to the topics Harvey suggests and the speakers he brings on, et cetera. So again, thanks to Harvey for doing that. So for this session, and of course, it's January 22nd, 2022. We're going to start off with some introductions, and then we have a memorialization for Abbie Jullien, and then we're going to talk about International Privacy Day, and then cover a few things on what's new in privacy. From 10 to 10:30, Graham's going to speak about the privacy culture surveys and the International Privacy Report, which was issued in April 2021. From 10:30 to 11, Samir is going to speak on the need for data discovery and mapping. And that's always very important. And I know I have a few questions on that. And then from 11 to 12, we have a panel discussion with Joe, Samir, and Dahlia, and of course, myself and Kevin and Harvey. And we'll make it interactive and really have a open dialogue for privacy issues and topics and what's top of mind, what are we seeing right now, occurring, and what are the challenges, et cetera. So really look forward to that, and it's a great way to close out the day from 11 to 12. So those are our, that's kind of our agenda for the day. So again, we'll wrap up at noon Central Time today. So with that, Harvey, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I know you've got some introductions you want to make, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Ted. Thank you. And I want to say that that first slide you're looking at is or one of the slides that we had where I'm the host. Yeah, that's true. But Ted is irreplaceable, and really appreciate all of his help. And Kevin Hall also is a moderator, so we appreciate that. So I want to welcome, I haven't looked to see that you're on, but Joe Bracken, are you on this morning? Joe is going to be joining us later. Joe is CPO of Informatica, and he's an attorney and a technology attorney and a tremendous guy and very helpful. And so Alexis, I see you're on. That's perfect. So welcome. Wanted to say welcome to you. And just if you would, just please give us a brief introduction of yourself now.
Perfect. So my name is Alexis. I think I've known Harvey for a couple of years now. We both enjoy the service to ISACA, so we're dedicated for life. I'm out of the South Florida chapter. I've been a part of the organization for about 15, 16 years now. primary focus is in data privacy. I eat and breathe this stuff. It's like an obsession, I would say. And that's more about it. I'm always about being of service, and I love to be a part of these discussions. Obviously, Abbie was very special for us as well. She was a mentor and somebody that I kind of worked very close with for a couple of years.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Glad to have Alexis on here, and I'm going to call on him in just a moment, but I want to first see if Samir is on, and let Samir introduce himself.
Hey, Harvey. Hey, Ted, Alexis, and everybody at the ISACA chapter. So I'm Samir. I'm founder and CEO of Ardent Privacy. Long time, I would say, information security and privacy volunteer, subject matter expert. So ISC2, ISACA, and now IAPP, right? These are the three main organizations I volunteered. I was also pretty much involved with the CMC, Central Maryland chapter for ISACA. It's just I'm spending more time with IAPP, with privacy being more passionate thing right now, but I have some all love for ISACA, especially for Houston chapter, because just before the pandemic, I don't know if Harvey, you remember you and I actually made a trip for your big conference.
Yes,
also, and that was wonderful. And I saw the community overall. So that kind of attracted me to keep connected with the whole Houston ISACA chapter. So nice meeting you all. Happy New Year. We're gonna go through some technical content. I'll do my best to get the most productive. And I think these are all interesting topic, as Ted said, but how it's a meaningful, what you call time or investment commitment everybody should do with all the, not just regulatory perspective, but how privacy is impacting we as a society and also you as an organization. So really happy to be here. Harvey, again, thank you so much for inviting Ted and everyone at the chapter. Looking forward to the discussion.
thank you, Samir. And so the way I look at it, Samir's got a couple of things, more than that, but a couple of things from my perspective really going for him. One is a company on discovery and mapping, which he'll talk about, but also I believe is a training company where I believe you're the primary trainer for IAPP certification programs. Is that right?
Yeah.
Samir?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, so I'm not the trainer, but we are a training partner, right?
Okay.
I wish I can spend more time on the, the training. I love those. My mom, dad both actually came as a professor. So I love that. But the importance of that, right? I'm a product company, but I do have that online training partner relationship with IAPP, because just like what we observed in security 20 years ago, zero awareness, right? And we're still struggling with that awareness and asking people for major things. So I think training is the first thing to attract people in terms of get them conversant, because still I don't think a lot of people understand security and privacy, especially general public. I'm not talking about the technical folks here. Here we are all the big shots here from all the companies or who actually work in the technology and privacy and security space. They do understand, but so that's the goal, Harvey. But yeah, happy to help with if you need like IAPP training kits or anything of that sort, any information. I'm pretty close with that department and got some good connections there.
Excellent. That's why I brought it up. So yeah, let's have a chat and we can see what might be good to kind of make available to our folks as well. We know that ISACA is very much getting into this with a CPSC, which we very much support. And it has a different tack than IAPP, but IAPP also has some good recognition. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it. All right.
Yeah, and one last thing, if it's not on your radar, I would say do CIPM or CIPT. It's at least 20% paycheck upgrade. There are a lot of positions coming. The way I'm seeing the vibes in the market, I think data privacy is on the fire. So if you are like want a career switch or anything or exploring something new, please explore those certifications.
So thank you. And let me just camp on that for a minute. The CIPM and the CIPPE, that's what you said, right?
CIPT, the privacy technologies. That's even more specific, but that will align with more like technology folks if you really see certified information privacy technologies.
CIPT. No, I
Yes.
think you're right. Yeah, because what that does is that camps around pets. That camps around the technologies, encryption, pseudonymization. That's a good point. And if you get 2 of them, you can apply to be a fellow as well.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. All right. No, that's perfect. Joe, I haven't looked to see, but Joe Bracken, are you on now? Joe's not on yet. No worries. And so I want to, I don't even have the words for it, but I got to know Abbie Jullien probably a couple of years ago, and she had been a very important part of this event. She has participated as a panelist several times. She was a CPO, I'm sorry. She also was a CISO and had a great respect for GDPR and lived and traveled to the EU quite a bit. And I was very surprised to see that she had passed recently, November 3rd. So I want to say that I miss her and her wisdom. And then I also want to ask Alexis to say a few words on this, as he worked with her arguably much more closely than I did. Alexis?
Yes, Harvey. Thanks for the opportunity again. Yes, Abbie was one of those people that, you know, if you think that Harvey is obsessed about his service to ISACA, he was twice as obsessed in terms of
Yes.
her ability to be of service, her ability to be not only to represent the brand of ISACA, right? But if you're a chapter leader, she would explicitly reach out to you. I know she was instrumental when I was president of the chapter for 4 years, and having the discussion about setting up programs around mentorship. You know, how do we mentor other leaders to move through the structure? And the whole, you know, a good spirit, all about purpose in everything that you do. When GDPR was being restructured, and I was a part of a cahoots that was there on the day it got enacted, I always went to Abbie, right? Because she was that source. She had someone in the UK who was in the IOC that we can reach and have conversation around the regulation to be able to get some experience on the ground. But from a chapter perspective, you know, we worked together more than 10 years. So like Harvey, when Harvey sent me, you know, the request or a notification that she had passed, it kind of hits me. So then obviously you go back and check your LinkedIn, or you check the last time you had a text message from Abbie that said, hey, you know, let's get together, let's have lunch. These was things that we do on a constant basis, whether she was on the board or not on the board. So about 10 years back, we had this conversation about establishing scholarships at the university level. And Abbie was the first one to kind of step out and did it, because she's like, oh, when I was at the Atlanta chapter, we did this. So we had got to a point where we established at the time about 7 or 8 different scholarships for students at the universities that we actually serve. And she drove a lot of that initiative to kind of grow the organization and try to make sure that I'm successful as a leader, right? She's always made herself available, irrespective of her roles and how busy she is. So for that, it really hit us as a community, and I shared it with with the board as well, that it was just so much life in Abbie, always willing to help you, always there to really connect and share her experience, especially for those who's just getting started. But at the board level, she was instrumental in a lot of the stuff that we do today. She's definitely cemented a lot of the stuff that I did from a GDPR when the law initially came out to try to connect me into the right place. And for that, I'll forever be thankful for her. So she's always going to live with us. She's gone, but definitely would not be forgotten.
Thank you, Alexis. Thank you very much. She has, she was on probably, I'm sorry, somebody else going to say something? Okay, no, my apologies. So she had been a panelist just regularly for us, and the last time in October, she wasn't able to because she was going back to Connecticut to go to a high school reunion. So we really do miss her presence, miss her advice, just everything about her. So thank you all. January 28th, 2022, International Privacy Day. So that, as I understand it, started in about 2008 here in the US, and as a day to recognize privacy as being important. And we obviously need to do it the rest of the year, but it's a good thing to do. And I'd just like to hear if some folks are doing that in their companies, if anybody's doing something. If you just come on and say a few words about that, please. Okay. And
So we have a couple of events if you want.
Sure, please.
Yeah, coming up. So at the Baltimore chapter, KNET chapter, we have a global kind of talk, especially on the India Data Protection Bill, which is expected to be passed very soon. So we're going to talk about that and whatever is up in 2020. It's on my LinkedIn or even the IPP event. And there is an innovation award on Wednesday, the Privacy Innovation Award. So I think next week is full of event. If you go there on the
Right.
IPP website, I think you can spend entire week in those events. But I recommend that, yeah, there is a lot of stuff coming up. So the life is virtual now. So it's a pretty good thing to attend. Anything, topics you like.
All right, thank you. No, I appreciate that. Excellent. Okay, so now what's new in privacy? And we haven't been here for a couple of months, so there's a lot new. And Ted, I'm going to turn that over to you to start with. I think you're probably going to, I'm guessing you're going to start with Log4j, as that is, as security is a foundation of privacy. So Ted, what do you think?
Yeah, hey Harvey. So yeah, so I thought we'd kick it off with Log4j. You know, I want to have an interactive discussion on this, but most of us probably know, but just to kind of set the ground rules on this, I don't know that I've observed a, you know, at least that I can recently recall, a zero-day vulnerability with such a piece of software like Apache Log4j that's impacted as many organizations. And when I mean organizations, I mean cloud providers, software vendors, as well as, of course, you know, just public and private organizations, commercial organizations, et cetera. So Apache Log4j, I'm just going to quickly cite off of Wikipedia here. It's a Java-based logging utility. It's part of the Apache Logging Services, a project of the Apache Software Foundation. And Log4j is one of several Java logging frameworks. So it's used for logging with the Apache software. And so on December 9th, 2021, so a little more than a month ago, a zero-day vulnerability involving arbitrary code execution in Log4j was published by the Alibaba Cloud security team and given the descriptor log4shell. It's been characterized by Tenable as the single biggest, most critical vulnerability of the last decade. So to kind of put that in perspective, I was just reading an article yesterday that was saying that if for people that are using Apache software, that if they have not patched this Log4j issue, then that it's probably almost guaranteed that they've been infiltrated, or you know, very likely they've been infiltrated, because the hackers are really exploiting this capability within Apache. So let me just kind of pause there. I just kind of wanted to give a little background, but this is a very significant event that's affected a lot of companies. And let me just open it up to discussion. I'd like to hear if you or your organization has been working on this 0-day vulnerability with Log4j, if anyone has any thoughts or comments on it.
Yeah, this is David Sledge. I did want to mention, I think one of the distinctions with Log4j is with some of the growth and new initiatives and whatnot in the federal government for cybersecurity and so on. This is the first vulnerability that I'm aware of that the federal government has actually come out and made the statement, we will come out and you will be responsible if you do not take action on this and your clients or customers' data is breached. And I think that's a real distinction. Before I think there's so much, it's such a foggy area when it comes to breaches and when they occur and so on, and vulnerabilities of all sorts. But it was a very clear statement publicly made that you need to patch this, and if you don't, you will be held responsible. And I think that right there, I mean, there's 100 other ways that it separate, that this is a unique vulnerability, but that alone really, I remember that just really caught my attention.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, David. And yeah, the government is taking this very serious, and the government, speaking of that, they've really stepped up their requirements. We all know of the upcoming CMMC requirements, et cetera. But there's been, guidance given for critical infrastructure companies, et cetera, that you need to apply patches within a very short time frame of when they become available. And so this does kind of follow in that vein, if you will. And I was just, I think the other thing that we all have to keep in mind here is I was just watching on the news last night around the whole Ukraine issue, and Ukraine's already been been attacked.
Tennyson, yes.
With cyber warfare, if you will. And so, when you have that, those issues occurring, it just makes these all that much more important. And I was telling one of our customers this week, we were talking about it, and I said, it's estimated that about 85% of organizations pay the ransomware ransom, if you will. So the vast majority of people are paying it in order to be able to recover their instances. I do not, obviously that's not the place we want to find ourselves, because when you're 85% successful, that's a very good hit rate, for the attackers. I mean, in baseball, if you're 40% successful, if you bat 400, you're unbelievable, right? And they're batting at, at 85%. So it is something we have to be mindful of. And I think what everyone needs to keep in mind, I'm not saying that this is going to happen. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but if Russia crosses into the Ukraine, and we know that a substantial part of ransomware payments are going to entities that are in Russia, and that North Korea funds a lot of their military establishment through crypto and ransomware, et cetera. We could wake up tomorrow where the US government says, you are not allowed to pay ransoms anymore, because that money is making its way to our, to countries that we have sanctions against, et cetera. When the president speaks about severe sanctions for Russia, you have to wonder if payments, for ransomware would be included in that. And I have a hard time believing that our government is going to turn a blind eye to corporations sending money over to Russia at a time when potentially one of our allies is being attacked. So anyway, these are just things that I think we have to think about. And again, these are my opinions. I want to be clear about that. And only opinions. If I was an expert, I'd have access probably to a lot higher up people. But the Log4Shell vulnerability, as Tenable said, they view this as probably the most significant vulnerability in the last 10 years. And there's never a good time for these, but coming at a time right now where there's this unrest in the Ukraine, et cetera, it definitely comes at a very concerning time. Anyway, going back to your point, David, I completely agree that the requirements from the U.S. government, and quite honestly, I think their tolerance for ineptitude. A lot of organizations. I work with organizations that have a policy that they patch every 2 years, right? That ineptitude, I've been trying to tell organizations it's not going to continue to be tolerated. I understand that it's cheaper for you to do that, and they
Well, it's cheaper now.
Yeah, well, maybe, maybe to your point. Right. It depends on the rent. Last year there was a ransom paid in excess of $40 million.
Right.
So
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
to your point, is it really cheaper?
But I think it's a great time. I think it's a great time for Log4j, right?
Well,
What I like,
yeah.
yeah.
Right.
And I'm not being, being in all serious and honesty, I think it's a great time only because it forces you to test what you're doing, right? And I agree with David. I think when I look at what CISA is doing with the guidelines that they've provided, I think it forces us to hold people accountable. Because if you're going to run whether it's critical infrastructure or non-critical infrastructure, it is impossible to think that on a regular basis, you are not scanning and looking for vulnerabilities or have the capability to be able to have a tool or an operationalized process that when something like this come up and you discover it, you can go scan your system, you can go look for that immediately. And if you're not doing it, then you're putting your business at risk as well. I think the decision in terms of whether you pay ransomware or not now become a business decision, right? Because as privacy professionals, we like to say, oh, never pay a ransomware. But if you have not paid ransomware, if you're being hit by a ransomware, the reason why you're going to hit because there is things that you are not following, right? Or you didn't have the ability to recover from that ransomware or the ability to detect it. Because research is going to show most of those incidents, the adversary has been in your network anywhere from like 12 months to 18 months, right? So you're just discovering now because now the whole world is now looking, but that individual or organization may have been exploiting it for a while and now you're just discovering it.
Right.
And it shows your level of maturity, right? As an organization, like you rightfully said, these are things that should be continuous and should be ongoing. We, as an industry, we tend to be more reactive instead of thinking of it like as a privacy professional. I always tell anyone I'm working with, I expect you to be breached. We start from that perspective. I expect you to be breached. It's a matter of the exposure, right? Are you going to breach that non-segregated part of the network that doesn't have all of the critical assets, right? Do you have a layered approach to be able to determine, okay, you can create a honeypot or something and let them go there and trap them and kind of analyze the activity that is going. And the first part of that is just getting into your network, right?
Right.
That's the easiest part. The difficult part should be to get out because once they get out, the payloads are coming in. Right. The first part is just to get in. So once they're in, they're just doing discovery. It's just like the military, right? We're gonna go look at a target. We're gonna go do some recon, analyze the area or adversary, collect as much data as we can, and then we do a plan of attack. And it's the same thing that happened in the industry today. Like you rightfully said, the there's organization who's not taking those initiatives to either patch or do effective controls for whatever reason. You may have an application that is so old that they don't want to touch it because they're assuming it's going to break. And once it breaks, the wheel is going to be at a loss,
Right.
right? So now there's multiple technologies that's there to be able to scan and look for that. I think the emphasis needs to be focused on how do I prevent you from getting out after you get in? Because I know you're going to be in, right? More than likely. And no matter how much money you have and tools you have, you're not going to come up against a state adversary. And you got to look at how they strategically attack multiple things. Same thing with Ukraine or other locations. Recent report have talked about them discovering that there's malware and everything already in their system.
Right, right.
And most of those adversaries, the malware is just sitting there, and it's until it's ready to be executed from whichever state where it's coming from. And if you're not taking those initiatives as a community or as an organization, it's going to be easy for your organization to be exploited, not only by a state adversary, but script kiddies or other things that's just going to just run scan, right?
Yeah.
One of the challenges that I see today is like multiple people, everybody trying to go to the cloud quickly, right? Everybody know a cloud is just somebody's computer someplace else other than yours. But I think we have this click next fatigue where people think it's so easy to do it and not really understanding the maturity of the security infrastructure.
S3
I'm sorry,
Yes.
go ahead, George, go ahead.
I was going to ask a question. Does anybody actually know whether or not the code libraries were corrected so that ones that are not already compiled can actually use the log4j? I mean, did the Java libraries get fixed? And
They were
GitHub?
updated.
Yes, they were.
Yes, several times actually, because once they corrected it the first time, they identified an additional flaw or additional vulnerability within it
Right.
that was caused and so on. So, but yes, they have updated this.
So it's just compilation issues with a Java compiler will be the big issue as far as reissuing software to software people that have embedded it in there for 20, 40 years. I'm thinking about two items. Eric Snowden brings to mind immediately, the known 0-day. And then the second is the B-52s are expected to be used till 2050. I find that amazing. It describes what's happening in the software environment as well.
Yeah, no, good point. Another statistic I'll throw out, because we always, when we mention, and I know we're talking privacy, and that's what I want to relate this back to. When you talk ransomware, everybody immediately jumps, and I understand this because this is where it started, around they encrypt your systems, they make them unavailable to you, and then they ask you for a ransom to get the encryption key so that you can unencrypt the data and make your systems available again. That's where it started. But it's estimated that 40 to 45% of the ransoms paid now are paid because they exfiltrate the data. And so they hit you twofold. The first thing they do when they get in is they'll exfiltrate your data, whether it be unstructured or database data, et cetera. They will copy that out of your network onto their network. And then they will make your system unavailable. And then they hit you with two ransom demands. The first one is, we want a payment in order to provide you the encryption key to make your system available. Because that's everybody's, obviously, especially for critical systems, that's top of mind and an immediate concern. But the second one is, we will sell this data on the dark web and to other people. And of course, it's got loads of privacy data within that data. And if we sell it, then, and really you would have to, once they've exfiltrated it, you've incurred a breach, you would have to report it to the authorities at that point. But if they sell the data, then it obviously is going to be probably very likely be utilized against those individuals. And one thing I want to say about this that I think is lost on a lot of people is the healthcare industry is being hit 3 times as much as any other industry. And that is because a healthcare record is estimated to be valued at about $25. It probably depends. I'm sure that figure varies, but it's substantial because of the potential for Medicare and Medicaid and Medicare fraud and healthcare fraud if they have your medical information. This is a multi-billion dollar industry that they can utilize. To put that in contrast, your Social Security number is worth approximately $1, and it's estimated that your PCI information, if they have your credit card data, that's valued at about $3. So that just gives you an idea of the value of this medical information. And I point that out because probably what most organizations would consider, when I talk to customers in organizations, I'll ask them, what are your most critical systems? And that is important from an availability standpoint. But you also have to ask, what are the systems whose information, if it was compromised, would cause the most regulatory impact, the potential fines, and of course, the impact to the individuals themselves. Almost never do I hear HR systems, but those HR systems contain a multitude of medical data about the individuals, at least the way a lot of HR systems retain and store and collect data. And so I just want to point that out because, again, remember that almost half of ransomware extortion is around releasing data publicly without your approval, obviously. And then the other half is around the availability of the system. And I think as we see the privacy regulations continue to increase and go up and get more strict, if you will, that may exceed the percentage of the ransom you'll pay for that may exceed the ransom that maybe you would even pay for the availability of your system. Because, and the sad thing, the last thing I'll say about this is there are relatively easy things you can do to mitigate a large amount of risk there. For instance, if you utilize your own database encryption or data encryption, like if PDF documents, if you mandate that encryption be utilized for them, even if the hacker was to exfiltrate that data, it would be of no use to them because they would not have the encryption key, right? So ensuring that your data is encrypted, that you've taken the step to encrypt it first, and you've encrypted it at the data level with the database or with the documents like PDF does encryption, et cetera, that mitigates the exfiltration, right? So that's a quick way to stop that, and especially in light of all the impact it has on people, the regulatory impacts, et cetera. And for the availability piece, and we were just, Alexis, you were talking about the cloud, et cetera. And I agree, a lot of people simplify moving systems to the cloud in their mind versus, doing it. But what I will say is that in addition to your recovery, everyone should have a backup and recovery process and test it, et cetera. But in addition to that, you can set up a replication system that is replicating up to the minute transactions in your various databases, SQL Server, DB2, Oracle, whatever they are, you can replicate that to the cloud, right? To whatever cloud provider of your choice. And that gives you a clean instance because that's a segmented network, right? So then when they do encrypt that database and take it down, then you have the last transactions available to you in that database that resides either in the cloud or maybe if it's a separate data center you have or something like that. But what I'm saying there is that will help you recover or restore is a better way of saying it. That is a method to restore your data, et cetera. Still going to probably take some time, et cetera. And again, you should still have your recovery procedures that are separate from that. But I'm just trying to say, look for segmenting as well. But I didn't want to make this a ransomware discussion. But when we talk about, they do go hand in hand because you talk about log4j, you talk about an attacker being able to penetrate, and then you talk about once they penetrate, they can exfiltrate that data and then leak, sell that out on the dark web. And then you're violating GDPR and PIPL and
HIPAA,
HIPAA, CPRA, all of those that come into play. So it makes a full circle back on the privacy topic that we're talking about.
It's definitely.
So
I think
there
it
is
Go ahead, Samir.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure I don't forget, right? So I actually changed my viewpoints, right? I changed all this. So I was actually at Lockheed Martin in the vulnerability management program. And I'll tell you a little bit different view, right? And I think, Ted, you actually talked in that sense in later part of your conversation with encryption in the ransomware part. So number one, right, the software supply chain is a complex issue, right?
Yes.
There is so much to it, open leverage. So eventually, and that's where the whole this data-centric security topic, and I'll tell you, so how many softwares you will chase, right? Because see, you use some kind of open source library, right? Then that is used in some Oracle software. On the top of that Oracle software or database, you build another application that is connected with some other API. And it's such a complex issue, right? In terms of maintaining that and chasing those vulnerabilities. So I'm not saying we shouldn't patch, we should definitely patch, right? But I see more and more over last 10 years, this is becoming a never stopping game, right? It's an endless game. So recent times, and that's what what I'm basically turning my towards that, hey, are we chasing vulnerabilities and is that even a fixable problem to its perfection? I think not. So what we do is actually move controls and that energy, right? Keep doing whatever. Everybody has a vulnerability management. Everybody has a patching program. The practical problems are how can you keep up to it all the times? Because today it was Heartbleed in 2013, right? And we chased and patched and everybody that give a good actually kind of footage to the security. People know the importance. But eventually what I'm saying is we need to focus our controls toward data, right? So encryption, basic control, minimization, deletion. So I think the vulnerability we are looking in general as an industry, right? We are chasing so much, and I think it's important. Same thing with incident response. So we are looking too much in the detective manner, right? Rather than preventive manner. So controls like, hey, even if you are impacted tomorrow with log4j and then ransomware or whatever. So if you encrypt your data, of course, they can't do anything with it. So you are saying we're not going to pay anything because anyway, that data is encrypted, right? At least we got good as far as that encryption algorithm is good. So that's a viewpoint. I'm basically been that, yes, vulnerability management, but it is software supply chain is becoming so complex. And it's still, if you see today, whatever tool set we got there, right? In terms of software supply chain management, like now OSS, right? Open source library, checking and all that. But that is again a blacklisting approach, right? So after 0-2, we get to know, we don't know what software was vulnerable 3 years ago, right? It's always basically consistently like whack-a-mole kind of thing where you have new. So I think we need to focus our controls, very fundamental, basic, what we learned in old school. And another thing I wanted to mention is the whole ransomware issue, right? If you see from a security professional, right, you are getting impacted with ransomware is a fundamental training issue, right? And I'm not saying that users are this and that, but what I'm saying is all the basically audience on this call, they did not listen to them and basically did not even include in major meetings or security awareness sessions. So that's a fundamental problem with ransomware. Unfortunately, we cannot do that. I mean, we cannot fix that. It comes from the tone from the top. But I think more we pay attention towards fundamental controls, we will have better handle of it. Because this year, last year, it was something else. There was congressional hearing about that whole thing. This year, it's Log4j. Tomorrow, it's going to be something else. So this is a constantly non-ending chain. So I think we need to really focus on fundamental, knowing your data better, and basically putting controls more closer to the data rather than the whole perimeter thing and doing the blacklisting kind of approach.
But you got to look at where the industry is going, right? One of the things that I look at, so when you look at where the attacks are coming from, you know, they're targeted in the sense that, you know, why would someone attack a healthcare system, right? Someone would attack a healthcare system because the type of data that they maintain, because they're going to have multiple type of information from you. Why would they attack the GSA or other organizations that have the last 10, 15 years of your job history, family relations, and all of those things? They're sinking that attack. And then what next thing they're going to go after is the credit bureaus, because your whole life it is there, right? At an institution that I managed before, going back to the conversation about attacks within healthcare, one of the challenges they face is not just for the institution, but you as a patient. You know, we've had situations where people have come in with false information and get procedure. So imagine if somebody coming with your information, Harvey, to try to get a procedure, and now your medical record is updated with that information, right? So as a patient perspective, that's become a very large challenge. And when you look at it from an organization perspective, like I was saying before, the whole challenge around ransomware is there's a breakdown in terms of processes, because if you allow them to be in the system long enough, that replicated data could also now be blocked, right? So most organizations that did DR years ago, like I remember running DR for Office Depot when Katrina was coming through, right? Having all of that information online is going to be a challenge. So you can encrypt something, and I mean, you can go and encrypt and do all that stuff with previous data that's on a tape, right? Or on an offline mode, because we are replicating the data, but we need to better be able to detect that the adversaries is in our network, because somebody's going to be scanning and looking at stuff. If your medical record is going to get encrypted, they had to do that for a while. They had to come in somewhere through an application, whether it's a third-party vulnerability or something along that line. They had to make movement within the network, right? And if you're not able to detect anomaly and different slight changes in your network pattern for traffic, then you're always going to be behind the 8 ball. You continuously chase after the adversary when they're already right here, because you're not looking internal to your network and say, oh, that's the other organization down the road. It's not happening to me, until, like those were saying, you get to the point where once they encrypt your data, that's the half part. Then they'll send you the note, and then they'll try to threaten you that they'll post it and reveal it. But if you know where your sensitive data is, and you set up those, not only going back to Samir's question about the perimeter, you need to have a certain approach, right? So it's okay to get compromised, but it's what can I get to after I've compromised your network? You know, are you practicing best practice process around least privileges? I always assume that the individual with the highest level of access represent the most risk. I start out from that mentality, and then I work myself backward. You have to come in and do your job, but I should be able to detect any changes. And you need to understand where people are, whether it's a financial situation or any kind of personal challenges that a person may have, because that person can come in and work for a very long time. You cannot not detect Edward Snowden moving stuff to a USB data to get it out, even though he's the administrator on the system, right? You always have to assume everyone is operating in that mentality, because you never know what situation they may in or financial decision that may drive them to just share your information. And we've seen some research now, the ransomware people are sending email to people within the company that says, I would ransomware your organization and give you a portion of the proceeds, right? So they're not trying to do the heavy lifting of compromising the organization. They're asking the people internal with the access to share it, right? So if you have someone that you don't really know what they're doing in your organization, and they don't like management, or they have a differences in change of activities and how they're moving within the organization, you have to be mindful of that, because we always have to look for those small changes is what we've seen that leads to big issues that organizations are not focusing on. Knowing where your critical data is very important. Making sure you have encryption and additional technologies in place. Because even when you look at it from a healthcare perspective, when OCR or other organizations come in place to analyze you after a risk, the first thing they're going to ask is, what did you do before the events, right? And if you can prove that you have processed and you took due diligence and you did all this work, then the fines and other corrective action may be a little bit less, because at least they know you did stuff. So if you're going to encrypt your data and they move it out, it doesn't matter that they move the data out. You just have to show that it's protected. And if they can't get to the data because they've moved it out, then you're in a better situation as somebody who's not taking action to encrypt the data at risk, or data that's in transit as well. But it's only going to get worse, because everything's getting automated now, and more organizations are trying to be online, and some people are taking shortcuts. And that goes back to my original point that as an industry, we tend to be more reactive. How many organizations that find millions of dollars to put programs in place after they've been breached, right? How difficult it is to go to the board and tell them you need money to invest in your privacy program and your vulnerability programs. Oh, no. We don't need that. You guys are not bringing in money to the organization, right? Everybody sees us as a sunk cost. And we're not really here to prevent the organization from advancing, but we try to make take the initiative that we are thinking of that risk at all times, right? And we're constantly looking for ways in which we as an organization can be vulnerable, and then try to address that before the adversaries get to those crown jewels.
Yeah, no, great point. So, Harvey, I know we have about 5 minutes to the top of the hour, and we're going to, in fact, I'll throw it back up. I know we're going to be moving on to the next topic. Do you want to give everybody a 5-minute break real quick, or how do you want to handle it for the next 5 minutes?
That sounds good. Yeah, we'll do that in just a moment. I think this has been an excellent discussion, and I want to thank everybody and each of you, and have made some good points. And I think especially you, Ted. And I think we need to try to, like Liz's comment. And I think we need to, I'd like to get kind of a takeaway from these of some of the key concepts and be able to share them back to you, because I think there's some excellent stuff here. Because if you can't start worrying about your privacy principles until your data is protected, by security. So this is excellent. So good. I think Graham probably is going to join early. So why don't we go ahead and take a 5-minute break? And thank you, Ted. Thank you, everyone who spoke on that. I think that was tremendous.
Yeah, and there's some excellent comments in the chat. If y'all haven't looked at them,
Please, yes.
Feel free to do that during our break. But we'll take a quick 5-minute break, and we'll get started right back at the top of the hour. So we'll give you just a few minutes to refresh your coffee. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Absolutely. And Graham, are you on, sir?
Violation. All right, so welcome back, everybody. Again, Ted Sherrill and Harvey Nusz with the ISACA Greater Houston chapter. Again, these Saturday privacy sessions are complimentary, and they're open to any and everyone. So we appreciate y'all joining. They run from 9 to noon on the 4th Saturday of every month. And we always have a lot of different topics, open discussion. These are not meant to be lectures. They're meant to be interactive discussions, etc. But Harvey does a great job of always lining up a few speakers to present on a few topics that spur conversation. So Harvey, I'm going to turn it back over to you so you can introduce Graham for us this morning.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, this is easy when I'm talking with everybody here in the United States. I can just ping you on a message and say, hey, are you ready? How are we doing? Graham is in the UK. Graham is in Scotland. Graham is in Edinburgh. And so he is having trouble getting connections. And so I just talked to him via Teams, thankfully, via Capgemini Teams. And so Samir, I hate to put you on the spot. I hope you're listening. Could you go ahead and plan on doing the first 30 minutes? Samir, would that work, sir? Samir? Of course, while I was trying to talk with Graham, I didn't bother getting Samir here on my messaging.
He's logged on, but he's on mute, Harvey.
Harvey, we can continue some discussion around some of the other topics until your speaker is able to organize himself.
Exactly, and I think that's probably what we'll do here. So I think Samir mistakenly thought he had a 30-minute break right now. So yeah.
Hey, Harv.
Yes, sir.
This is Steve Wilson.
Hey, Steve.
I had sent in a message when I was on my personal computer. I had to go over to my company computer to be able to talk to you. Has anybody been reached out to by the FTC to ask them the steps they've taken since they've made the statement that they're going to go after companies who didn't take reasonable actions against Log4j? Or do we think that something's coming soon? Because they're going to have to start asking us questions to be able to determine if they're coming after us or not.
So repeat that. So you've gotten something from the FTC, is that correct?
Not yet. But my lawyers are telling me that I need to get something written up and ready to go, and I'm just wondering if everybody's scrambling to put something together too, and it's still an evolving situation. So my question is, has anybody been reached out by the FTC, or are they trying to anticipate that they're going to send something out and we need to be prepared to discuss how we handled it?
Graham's trying to get connected. That's a great question. Has anybody faced that? Ted, have you heard of that?
I have not. Steve, I have not heard of that. So,
well, are your lawyers suggesting that you start preparing something and having it ready in case we need to respond?
Okay, thank you. All right.
You talking about for the company I work for, Oracle? I haven't spoken to. I've spoken to our attorneys about our Log4j notification, but I haven't spoken to them about anything related to what you're talking about preparation for that. So, I can't. So I haven't heard anything. I guess that doesn't mean that doesn't.
Maybe they're just trying to get a jump on it, or assuming that they might. So
yeah, it doesn't mean that they're not doing it. It just means that I'm probably in the dark. Attorneys tend to be pretty close to the vest with that stuff. So, but no, it's a good question. I don't know. Has anybody else? Remember, you can unmute yourself. Has anybody else heard about this, or are y'all trying to get prepared for those questions?
So let me just kind of restate what Steve said, that you're looking for the FTC to come and see what you have done. Let me ask that question. Is that it, Steve? What do you think is the essence of their question?
The FTC came out and said that if companies don't take reasonable steps, they're going to come after them. All right. Okay. So I'm sure my lawyer has read that article, right? Okay. And said, oh, by the way, cybersecurity, maybe you better get something prepared to be able to present to them to indicate what steps we had taken so we can avoid this possible fine or whatever sanctions they're going to do to us. So anyway.
There've been some SEC chatter around that same thing as well, around organization within their scope to make sure that they're doing appropriate actions as well, right?
SEC and FTC. And so
Yeah.
what you're looking at is what you did and when you did it, right?
Yeah.
That's
probably
what the
you
way
gotta
I
fix
plan
up.
to attack it is
Yeah.
to, you know, how did we get notified? You know, did we get notified by multiple people? Did we get notified in a reasonable time frame? What did we use to guide us to understand the process so that we could do our analysis? What tools were available? What scanning we're still continuing to do? I don't think I'm going to go into grand detail of how we're contacting vendors and working with our system owners to get the patches put in. But I could anticipate that I'm at least going to have to show or talk about how we're tracking it. Past that point, I don't know what else to put other than the conclusion is we're still, you know,
Right.
it's a maturing situation. It's
Oh, yeah.
never ending at the moment. You
Yes,
know?
definitely it's fluid. It's
Right.
and it's going to continue. So it's not like it's something that you're
But how is the
anticipating.
FTC going to find out otherwise unless you just come out and say, oh, yeah, well, we didn't do what we need to do. We got hit. And then they're going to come find us. I just,
It's going to be one of those
last
random
time
situations.
on
So
the last
also
one
keep
sent
in,
out notices wanting to know what we had done, and we had to prepare something. So anyway, just was seeing if anybody'd been hit yet.
Yeah, well, I know a lot of people put stuff out in the chat too, but yeah, Steve, I haven't heard of anything. And Harvey, I do see Samir's back, so he might be willing to go ahead and go while we wait on Graham.
I think he is. Let me also just make a point. Hasn't it been the practice of the FBI at times to notify companies that, oh, by the way, you've been breached? So that might factor into this when you're talking about the FTC and them as well. And hopefully you won't be breached or get that. But I just wanted to mention that. Does that make sense?
They do have a tendency to hang out in your system and then come and tell you, like the exchange situation we had last year as well, right? That come and tell you that you were compromised. The question is, why were you there in the first place? That's what I asked. Thanks for telling me, but you know, why were you there as well?
Yeah, okay. Samir, sounds like you're on and about ready to start, and you can just share your slides then. Is that right, Ted and Samir?
That's right. Yeah. Hey,
Okay.
Samir.
Yeah. Hey, hello. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Absolutely pleasure meeting you all. I think these are wonderful conversations. So the most thing we learn from is like each other, right? Everybody got their unique and similar lessons we can learn from. So absolutely happy. So thanks for the invite, Harvey, Ted, and ISACA Greater Houston Chapter. Opportunity to present our value prop or the whole data discovery mapping. So I'll try to be less vendor centric, more like knowledge centric. But of course, we are now vendor. I actually a founder and CEO of Ardent Privacy. But let's go ahead and get started with the presentation here. Can you see my screen, Harvey?
I probably can. I'm not looking, but yes, I can.
Okay.
Thank you. Nimble approach. All righty.
Okay. Yeah. So just a little bit about. So we're gonna talk about the data discovery and mapping a little bit, right? Because that's getting pretty hot in terms of something to be done, right? Because of the privacy. So privacy compliance is coming as a business driver. So I think we need to write, it's always one thing to sell security and privacy in the organization. So I think we need to do two ways. So what I'm going to talk about, right? What is the approach, right, to data discovery and how can we make it nimble? Because it's incredibly complex issue, right? Discovering all the data in the organization is not the easy task. And in my last 2 decades of experience in security, I always saw that if you give your CIO or IT departments or whatever the non-security peers of ours, if they give them the complex solutions, they try to turn away from that, right? So you have to always start small, right? Everything in terms of their involvement, in terms of budget, in terms of their willingness to do it and whatnot. So I think nimble approach is very important, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Other thing is everybody needs some kind of reason, right? So even if you go to a privacy department, right? And I'm a big believer, or rather the proponent, that the privacy compliance, or that tools and technologies, right, that should be driven, or rather at least owned, or heavily involved from the privacy department, because those privacy and compliance department know that the legal liabilities as well as the damage it can do of the personal data. So they should be actually driving that too. But I see a kind of mixed bag because of the lack of technology expertise, because most of the privacy folks come from lawyers and they need a lot of help. So that is being pushed down to the technology or CIO organization. So what I mean here, privacy into profit center, because getting budgets is harder, right? We need to give value prop to the business, right? How we align the privacy and security to the business, right? What's important for them, why it is priority, and how they need to basically get the maximum out of that. So one of the value prop I always say is turn privacy into profit center. And in this cloud-centric world, you can really do that, right, with data minimization, because in so far, whatever, I haven't seen the data minimization project, right, like heavily done in the organization. Some actually are, very few organizations have actually done that. And it actually directly aligns with the security and both privacy, and privacy is a good business driver. So I said, turn privacy into profit center with data minimization, and how we can actually have a nimble approach to the discovery. So, yeah, trying to change slides here. So I think our data is kind of out of control in every organization at all levels, right? There is so much data out there, and discovering each of them is going to be a challenge, because we never delete any data. We just keep on adding data. So I actually want to give you a book reference from, I think 32nd FCC Chairman Tom Wheeler. It's a really good book. And it actually talks about what are our societal responsibilities, right? From Gutenberg to Google. So from printing to railroad, to all this data economy, what we live in. And what we live in right now is the whole, everything is data centric. So pretty good book. The crux of that book is, one of the things is that if we own data or generate that data, there is has to be a responsibility, right? And data minimization is also put that as a one pass there. So we have a responsibility of protecting that data, right? Protecting the privacy as well as the security of that data. And as far as volume goes, I think the problem comes from the sheer volume, because there is so much data out there, and there is no process, right? Inbuilt process, preventive process, where we try to control that, right? Everybody wants more data, and now privacy regulations are actually coming up, and hey, all the unnecessary data we store and then gets compromised. So pretty good book. I always want to start my conversation on that. If you haven't read that, pretty good to add to your reading list. As far as the regulatory liability goes, I think all the data protection regulations, they talk about kind of similar things depending on what is comprehensive, what is not. But from data discovery and mapping perspective and the deletion and all that data protection perspective, I think there are some common themes there, right? Of course, you need to have sensitive data or PII inventory, right? Personal data inventory. Do you have a sizable, or rather, do you know each and every piece of personal data you as an organization own, right? So they all basically do that. And even if they don't directly say, unless you have an inventory, how you're gonna basically correct, delete, and next thing. So that's number one. Right to access, give consumer rights. A lot of privacy conversations, unfortunately, they are not coming from like an individual privacy perspective here in US. GDPR gives that as a human right, but of course more coming from the consumer standpoint here in US and many places So right to access, so all the CCPA and the Colorado bill and Virginia bill, they give you right to access and correct. And it's incredibly important to know that data to even correct or even give what you have on individual. Right to delete, big right to be forgotten, the original concept which came from the whole GDPR, I think absolutely important. That also, eventually you need to know data discovery and mapping is the fundamental step to do all these things, right? Then other thing of all these regulation is third-party data sharing. What data you share with third parties or not, and how you are transparent to the users, right? And you don't get that until you know your data. And data minimization. Of course, GDPR heavily talks about it, the CPRA, the new version of CCPA, and even the other bill, I'm not sure, Colorado and Virginia, but they talk something directly that, hey, you should not be collecting and storing more data than you require. Of course, they all, some of them specifically state that annual audits and risk assessments you should do. So one thing, I mean,
Samir, let me interrupt you just a moment. And would you go back to the previous slide really quick, just a couple of comments. And first of all, thank you for pivoting for us really quickly. You know, you thought you had 30 minutes off, but you really didn't. So thank you. So go back to the previous slide, just a moment. The previous one. And
wait, this Zoom is not giving me the, I can go.
Okay, that's fine. So yeah, perfect. So a couple of things. One, I think discovery, mapping, and all of that is extremely important now because of the look back period for CPRA. Would you agree? And that next year, and by 2023, hey, you know, people are going to be asking, what did you do with my HR data that you haven't looked at for a while that was taken out of CCPA? And what about the B2B data? So those are critical things coming up this year. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Then you've got something here on cybersecurity maturity model certification. Talk to us about that a minute. I'll let you continue. And thank you.
Yeah. So they watered down that regulation, right, a little bit later. But if you see, they are clearly telling you in the CMMC that you need to actually know, right, and unclassified versus whatever the classification they do. You need to have a data inventory for that as well. So that goes into the similar line. I think they give a little bit of discount in implementation recently. But CMMC also, there is a particular clause where this data mapping or rather those kind of things are essential to your data privacy and protection program. So that's the angle I'm coming from. Is that what you're asking, Harvey?
Absolutely. You nailed it. Continue on. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll try. So Harvey, tell me how much time I have, right? I know we have, like, we start 10 past hour, and we also need to accommodate Graham, right? Graham. So how much time we got? Because then I'll go, man. I can talk about this.
No, that's a great question, and that's something that I had not been able to find a good way to step in and communicate it, and I had not. So I've been communicating with Graham, and Graham, I think, is probably on a playground somewhere with his children appropriately, and he's doing this from his mobile, and he's having trouble getting connection. And so if you don't mind, we're going to pass on him today. He's going to do this another time. I'm not even going to fill in for him. I could easily give this, but he's so much more of an expert because he has a much better accent than I have, and because he's calling in from the UK. So let's go ahead. I believe we can turn this into a discussion period. Let's take this up as far as reasonable, up toward the end of the hour. And as Alexis said, we always have some other things to talk about as well. Go ahead, please, and thank you for asking.
Yeah, definitely. I'll just get my phone here, so I have a clock on me. So we got 40 minutes around. Okay. So yeah. So one thing we quite miss, right? And I come from heavy security background, right? We used to actually lot on the healthcare. Almost my last decade I spent in healthcare with CMS, the whole Affordable Care Act agency, and completely agree without the cost of stealing the healthcare data. I think Ted and somebody made comment earlier. So this is a healthcare example, right? So what I want to say, right, that there is an impact. So we really need to look at, right, while chasing vulnerability and security from perimeter security approach, I think we need to go to a reverse approach, right? What's the impact, right? Where are my crown jewels, or what eventually has a potential of getting breached? And I think Alexis also mentioned that, but somehow we in most of the organization, we are still, I think, on the traditional security aspects of it. We are not looking that from data perspective. We are still looking from the overall security, and a lot of that budget. So there was interesting survey there by Health Security like 4 years ago, that 90% of enterprise security budgets are actually spent on securing everything but the data, right? Almost 90% close to. So that's a lot of, so how much today, if you go and look at your budget, how much we spend on encryption, right? Spend on encryption compared to how much we spend on firewall and perimeter and stuff like that. So, and malware, right? I think most of the big check goes to probably McAfee, Symantec, or whatever the endpoint, because that gets more popularity. So we really need to change our mentality, because financial loss is gonna come from amount of data breached, right? So you may eventually all the bad actors or whoever it is, they are all focused towards your data. So we need to move again controls closer to the data, because your impact is parallel to amount of data breached, right? And that also gets into the privacy and data minimization. And so less data you keep them for hacking or basically out there, it's absolutely important, but it doesn't get as importance in a typical organization today. I think we are missing that. Another good example, again, this Blackboard had a breach. Morgan Stanley has a data disposal fine. So if you see, this was all about the whole, and there was a pretty fun story about ransomware with Blackboard. And there was the point of this slide is there is a chain reaction, right? So this company called Blackboard, I don't know how, if you know, they are like a marketing analytics company, I think, and they do a ton of other things, but they were sued by HHS, right? Under that, whatever the HIPAA or something, but it was not one company, right? There are like 10 hospitals actually sued them, because all their 100 customers were using that particular software or their data service, right, which eventually got breached. So they got hit by HHS, those hospitals and whoever, and that actually, because, so there is a chain reaction of the whole, these hacks as well. And we need to really understand that, right? Where are our liabilities, right? And we need to really align our security and privacy programs to the business, right? And how do I do that? If I know my data, I will be able to do that. If I don't know my data, I don't think how we do that, right? So we are doing a lot of good, what you call hygiene controls, but I think we are missing some point in most of the organizations in terms of the data. So if I go to a CIO, then CISO or CPO, whoever is the responsible, or all, actually you can ask, can you confidently say, right, all my sensitive data is stored? Do you have actually a working inventory that, okay, where is my employee data? Where is my customer data, right? Is that in one place, 10 place, right? So GDPR gives you the a legal requirement to have that inventory of that data. The other regulations kind of indirectly state that, but not directly. I think GDPR is the most comprehensive, so they do a good job. But no matter what, you need to know where all your data is in. If you don't know that, then how will you even know what is breached? And that happened in 2018. There is a public Marriott data breach, right? They actually said when they got breached, they announced that there were like 500 million customers' data was breached. In 3 weeks, they did investigation and said, no, we did not actually look, but I think we lost around 381 million. That's a big number to miss in terms of the customer. And if you see the cost of that, that means 187, if it's 383 multiplied by how much, just credit card monitoring. They got eventually $1 billion loss in that all. It costed them $1 billion, but you just compare that $100 credit monitoring or $25 credit monitoring for next 3 years or whatever, that itself is a big cost. So your loss is proportional to how much data you breach. And we need to, I think, I'm a big proponent that we should actually think the whole security in that sense, that what people are after and we need to protect what matters most. So yeah, again, that can you assertively say, I don't have excess data stored? If somebody says yes, I'll be so impressed, right? That I don't have any excess data, right? Or excess sensitive or personal data in my organization. But unfortunately, no, I think the data is so humongous. It's such a complex issue. It's very difficult even for the C-level or even the data admins or the data officers or CISOs to say that. Do you know that how vendors and third parties using customer data you own and share? So do you have even an inventory, right? That I was talking to my buddy at QuickBooks, that Intuit company. They have 500 partners, right? Where they share data through API. So do we know how much, I mean, does business ask you when you do that API integration, is security involved in that? Do you have a full inventory that, okay, these are the data elements I share with my partner or whatever, if you're a customer-centric organization, how many file transfers you are doing? Basic stuff, but I think we still are actually pretty lagging behind that. Are you making sure data is securely deleted after use, right? So currently we are doing this from the DDoSing perspective when data centers are decommissioned and all that. But I don't think we delete data when its use is over, right? And a lot of privacy regulation now is there a purpose for keeping that data? So I don't think it's just an end of life question anymore. You need to do this on continuous matter. And of course, the data subject access requests, those consumer rights do come into the picture, right? Right to access, right to delete. So you need to enable this, your organization in that terms. Again, is that data securely deleted, right? And again, the cloud brings the new challenge, right? I hear a lot of fun talks, right? If I ask like a medium-sized organization, hey, what is your security? They say, oh, we got AWS, right? So I said, that does not mean anything. Okay, you are using a cloud service provider, but that does not give you default security. But I hear that more common than what I think. So you don't control there. So you need to have your own control, right? So AWS is going to have some standard SLA, but how will you prove that to the regulator if something is messed up? So you need to have your own proof of deletion and have some kind of process around that. So typical challenges, right? We all know, I'm just gonna go through that. What we got budgetary limitation. Nobody wants to fund the story because a lot of people, and when I talk to Samir, this is a big problem, right? But you know, it's like opening can of worms, right? Oh, discovery piece. How do I go to all those data stores and discover that? So a lot of people think it's not in their even the capacity or authority to do that sometimes, and they're not going to have budget for that. But I think that's what nimble approach comes into picture. We got to basically start assigning budget. Privacy is a good thing because all the security professionals and private, because of that compliance driver, we're going to get every organization will eventually have to spend money on this and do that. Lack of inclusion, right? These are some common challenges I've seen many times. If you are a security guy, major IT projects, my first goal in many projects was how to even be informed about new project, because security is not the first thing come to people's mind. And sometimes you spin that proposal in like 2 weeks, right? And if you lose in initial like design part of it, the security component, nobody is going to fund it later. So I think it's absolutely important. So all security, we have to actually go right in front of those projects and mandate those things that they include us. Lack of data hygiene, cloud adoption, we just talked about. And of course, security departments and privacy is even far off. They're all under-resourced, right? And they have this operational monitoring like incident response and ransomware incidents and this and that. They basically consume most of the brain power, even think about that. So we need to basically go over this challenge and take this as an opportunity, right? In terms of privacy compliance is an opportunity to do stuff, right? So I talk a lot about data minimization, but when I say data minimization, I think it all comes into the discovery, mapping, identification, classification, mapping. So why this, right? So one of the good business driver is cost optimization, because say you have a traditional data store, right? So in the older things we thought, right? Hey, we have everything. Like we bought some servers, then we bought some data stores, and we can store unlimited data, right? Who cares about how much data? We just keep on adding drives and ask for more hardware and stuff like that. It does not work that anymore with the cloud because it's always paper-driven, right? So a lot of organizations, what they're doing is lift and shift, right? So you don't know what data is important, what is not. So you're moving that entire data, right? So I'm actually working with one customer and we're trying to plug our tool into that even if you are able to reduce the 10% of duplicate redundant data, your privacy tool cost is covered, right? So take a cloud transformation or digital transformation as an opportunity to plug in the privacy and security there, right? Because it's going to save money. When we talk about saving money, people get excited, right? Your CIO will also give actually a better conversation or rather will give you better footage. If you just say, no, you don't have to do this and we need this compliance. So compliance is absolutely coming anyways. Everybody has to comply. This year and last year, right, with all the record number of regulations passing, I think data privacy will be strategic priority and it has to be. Otherwise, you will be far too late in that and it's to the point it becomes irreparable. A lot of these digital transformation projects are actually a re-engineering opportunity for IT and security team. The tool set is anyway completely changing. So take data-centric approach to your security. And I think things of this sort are very important to find your groundwork, the complex projects and stuff, because you're doing everything from the start. Opportunity to basically discover that data, minimize that data. And of course, you're going to save a lot of money with the storage point. And there is a good opportunity to plug your tools and technologies from privacy standpoint there. So I think I talked about that. So I will basically I'll put one actually, of course, what we need to do is privacy and security by design. And that's one of the value prop for the minimization. So also think about this project as a preventive approach rather than detective, right? Like IPS versus IDS we talk about. If we know our data, we have a better handle to protect that, right? So it's kind of a preventive, and that's why it doesn't get as much attention as your malware product, because if somebody is infected, something happens, it gets like takes the CIO's attention or your CEO's attention, and that gets prioritized. So we need to take this, right? The whole data-centric approach, right? And I talked this 10 times, but I think that's super important to have that. Other thing is excess data is a financial liability, and we need to think in that perspective. So every byte of additional data, right? Mainly the sensitive data, it's a liability, right? So in all those financial statements, we don't say cyber. Now people actually in those T11 reports trying to put the cyber risk and things of that nature there. But each part of that excess data is a liability, right? And especially the personal data, customer data, citizens data, whatever we talk about. So about our product, right? So I don't think we have full time to give the demo. I think we can do that probably in March, April timeframe. I love this. I would love to show you the whole thing. So what we are, right? So our product is called Turtle Shield, right? It is an AI-powered software to discover, identify, inventory, map, minimize, and securely delete personal data to be, very straight man. So what we do, we actually take the very nimble approach, and I'll go through some of the things. So this is our little turtle, right? It's called Turtle Shield because we want to make your security and privacy program like a shield of a turtle, right? That's where the original logo idea came from. But that's also a cool character, so we all love it anyway. Anybody wants any stickers around that, let me know, happy to mail you that. So as far as platform is concerned, we have primarily 4 modules. Yeah, Harvey, you were saying something?
Yeah, let's go ahead and pause a moment. No, I appreciate all of this. What did you say that you'd be willing to speak on? I didn't catch that. And I'd like for people, if they have any questions, to, in just a moment, ask them. But what did you say that you wanted to speak on?
The live demo. Yeah. I mean, the live demo. The demo.
Oh, the demo. Yeah. We'll
the
do
detail
that.
where we can go through each and everything. If that,
Sure.
Yeah. So because
Sure.
yeah, that will need itself is the, so I'm more going on the fundamental aspect of that, but yeah. So
No, that's fine. If are there any questions? Let me just ask. Anyone want to ask a question thus far?
Yeah, so on the software, what type of reporting does it output?
yeah,
Great
so yeah, reporting. So David, we give you, right, how much data, excess data you have, right? All the discovery you can run pretty much. I mean, what to, let me explain the tool, David, that will give you more idea, right? And let me go through like a couple of, or rather maybe like 5 more slides, and I think we'll be in better shape to know that. I think we still have, right? Yeah, we have pretty good timing. So there are 4 modules, right? The data intelligence, basically turtle shell data inventory module, privacy intelligence module, data minimization module, right? And RTBF module, right, to be forgotten. So we are trying to actually do the full life cycle, right? And that is in a very nimble way, like one small dose at a time. So DI module does this data inventory mapping and also third-party data intelligence, which is, I'll go through that. Data inventory, the first step you should do is have data inventory. So data inventory, we take a pretty unique approach, which is kind of patent pending, and we'll go over in next slide. The next thing is privacy intelligence. So once you have this data mapping, you can discover, identify data assets and have a advanced intelligence, which is probably used for also the subject right automation, the first initial mapping and stuff like that. So just to make it clear, you may have seen tools like OneTrust, and then the Trust Arc, and those kind of workflow tools. So we are into the next layer, right? That's, so we don't actually even go in that space of having workflows. Everybody have their own way of doing it. Some use ServiceNow, some use different, but there are like some prominent vendors. So we go one level below, right? How do you do a discovery? So we are into that discovery space there, not on the workflow space. Yeah, of course, some of them try to do a little bit of there, but what we do is we actually go to the data, right? Most of the workflow tools right now, and which is the essential first step to give you questionnaires and things of that sort, whether you have a personal data or not. But today, I was going through a very interesting conversation. I led one privacy engineering discussion about the PIAs, right? So one lady actually was from very reputed organization. She said that those business owners actually rejected their PIAs. They said, we don't have time to do this. We don't even know this. The business owner rejected, so they did not even cooperate. The reason behind that, it's absolutely complex, right? To even answer those questions for those people, business owners, and they own the data, but they all get the stuff done from IT. So what we want to do is we want to enable privacy, data, and all those officers to have basically a discovery that, hey, these are your data assets, and probably this is the guidance you should do when you do those workflow level PI. So we go into the data, discover that, and things of that nature. While we do this, we take a fundamental preventive approach. We give you insights into excess data, right? So we apply this AI-based models and simple retention-based models to a lot of data and tell you how much of data is not relevant. So say take an example of simple example of retention. Say you have a policy, retention policy of 10 years, right? And that's your master. There is nothing more you need to retain more than 10 years, or maybe whatever 20. Have some like so we will give you a report that, hey, 11% of that data is actually out of that policy. And we go actually into those files, attributes and stuff like that. And that's where we get that data from a larger organization, unstructured perspective. I think structured perspective, you do have some of the things. The other module is RTBF. So once you have this data subject right automation, I know there are some chats, but I think we will have those questions at the little bit once I complete that. So I don't lose my chain of thought. So RTBF, you need proof. So I don't know if you heard that Ashley Madison story, the Ashley Madison, the dating site out of Canada, where they told that user accounts were deleted and they did not ever delete, and that had a very bad impact. right? So right to be forgotten is incredibly important. We are very bullish on that. People are not taking that very seriously. I get like 1 in 100 requests around that, people who care about that. But I think as more regulations mature and enforcement increases, people will care about that. One module within the DI or PI is third-party data intelligence. So we can actually see it as a process to find out all data what you're sharing with people, whether it's through files or maybe the API and stuff like that. So also have what you are sharing outside and inside. So we use as far as data discovery, right? There are a ton of discovery tools. There are DLPs and stuff like that. Even a lot of this, your databases, structured data is somehow arranged in some places. Unstructured data, there are some tools coming, but I'll tell you what our differentiator or kind of thing is. And when I say nimble, so what we take is oil drilling approach to the data discovery, right? So when I say oil drilling, what that means is, I think Houston and Texas is absolutely a pretty relevant oil segment there, is you only dig deep where it's needed, right? So you do seismic survey, you take samples, and then you dig deep, right? You don't drill everywhere. And I think we need to do that because amount of data which we have today in the organization, first of all data should be covered for discovery, number one. Otherwise, you are not doing or following the regulation, or also not basically doing a good inventory of data, number one. Number two, the amount of data we are adding every day in typical organization, by the time you try to find social security numbers in all of that data, it's a never ending game again. So I think we have to basically be very strategic about that. And that's what we basically do. So our promise is we will save 75% of the discovery time, and we do a lot of intelligence on the metadata part. So I have to go through some more details, but that's what I'm saying. That's where when my whole nimble concepts comes into picture, that we only dig deep where it's required, right? So we classify, we give risk scores and all that data. So we enable the data protection impact assessment. Then after that is done, then you can actually do also a data subject, right? Automation. Other important part I want to mention here is, if you see these discovery tools, right? There is another is for the data subject right access. You have to enable the discovery of the data, right? But a lot of times what organization end up doing is they make another copy of data and search through those data, right? Just another security or privacy tool for discovering those things. So I think that is against the data minimization principle, and we should avoid that by all means as far as that goes, because data should be always at the source. So we actually are becoming a privacy governance rather than a data governance tool. So we want to integrate with all these large data stores, right? And some are VR, some are of course in works, and only send the command, right? If you want to delete data, you want to bring data from that. So a lot of stuff we are doing is not keep data in that data tool and not become another central point of failure for hackers to go after. Yeah, so I talked about a lot, but what, say for example, end goal of the whole exercise is, say for example, you're a multi-country organization, say multinational, and have personal data in probably 15 countries or so or whatever. So what we should have is the whole global data map. That's the first deliverable we do, right? And if you have heard of Article 30, of course, record of processing activities. So we automate part of it, not the whole thing. It also gets into the protection controls, which you need to fill in. Information asset register. So our goal is basically to have a file level, folder level, asset level kind of, and when I call information asset in ISO 27001 language, that level, our goal is to give you the data, right? In whatever concise matter we can give. And it can be big, but that's what we are trying to do, a very focused approach to it. So create organizational data map and realistic data inventory. And also we give parameters like where that data is located, right? Which country it is, you can tag, you can basically classify that data based on that in terms of, so as far as discovery goes, from the surface level, you can do most of that stuff. This I'll talk a little bit about the third-party data intelligence. So we can actually do on-demand what data is actually moving out versus coming in and things. I think I earlier talked about that. So we can run as a process on your server, right? Say if you have file transfers or even if you have API exchange, we can actually give you the inventory of data which is living outside the organization. Data minimization module. We also, of course, retention-based policy and AI-based policy. If you train the models, basically that what data is important, what data is not important, if you are able to define that. But I think the industry is in very specific stage where even if you can do a retention-based for now, that can actually save a huge one. Other aspect I want to give everybody here that this data, whole privacy, data minimization, and all this, that can also fit into your ESG strategy. I don't know if you have heard of that, many of you may, which is basically environmental, social, and governance. So a lot of investors, right, the companies who are basically IPOs or even venture funded, a lot of investors are pushing the responsible and climate change kind of approach, environmental, social, governance, and privacy is actually coming under that very well. So you can actually get some dollars from that department as well, that basically, if you do literally save some kind of CPU cycles or do that, can actually fit into that also. So another reason to declutter and manage your data and also get funding and align that with your ESG strategy. Another reason for mentioning that is if you are not putting, right, a lot of, I mean, these reports are done by probably, I don't know, legal compliance people. Sometimes people don't think, right, we can also actually plug the whole privacy tool, or rather those reports that, hey, we are doing something in this particular privacy, which actually fits into, because these ESG reports actually go into the K1 filings and stuff like that. It's a very high attention. So just a little bit of pointer that whole privacy can fit into or align with that as well. I mean, ESG has much larger scope, but the privacy should be the equal part of that. Yeah, so steps for the whole discovery, minimization, and mapping. Know your data, discover, identify data, inventory and map data, minimize excess data. While you do that, take that project in that and practice your secure data lifecycle with continuously getting rid of what you should not have. And I want to end on this value proposition slide, right? And which are kind of selling points and how right now, right, with all those privacy regulations and ransomware attacks, both from security and privacy standpoint, how it is a meaningful investment. I think this is one of the best security investment you will do in whatever, right? I mean, whatever the data discovery tool you invest in, because it will give you what assets, how to prioritize your security controls, right? And not just have those perimeter-centric approach, right? So what we are protecting, are we protecting what matters most? So value prop is due diligence, of course. All the CCPA, state, federal laws, everybody, it doesn't matter, healthcare, HIPAA, FERPA or PPRA in the child education, COPPA in those EdTech and gaming in those industries. There is, every regulation is actually requesting that anyway. You have to do due diligence. Other important aspect of privacy and basically security and protecting consumer data is it will actually gain, right? When I say about profit center, your brand value will be much better. And Apple actually started that bandwagon with privacy-centric approach. So I think as a consumer organization or even B2B organization, your vendors and partners and people will actually trust more to keep their data with you, and we'll monetize more on that if you actually earn their trust. And this is the best way, or rather implementing privacy is the best, and talking about is the best way of that. From security standpoint, I think risk reduction. If you delete the sensitive data which you really don't need, that's a big risk reduction. Also, knowing your data, removing the what kind of the controls you don't need and where to focus your control, that comes from that. And of course, privacy compliance we talked enough about. So yeah, that's our information. Our website is ardentprivacy.ai. I'm there on LinkedIn. There is a company page on LinkedIn. I'll leave on this again the quote from one of the analyst firm who actually visited us at RSA last year. But yeah, I'm open for the questions.
From a right to be forgotten perspective, how do you address the DSR concern around other people who may be part of the data set before you can remove that data?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, that's always the most sensitive function, right, Alexis? Everybody is freaking scared of that.
I was
right?
not trying to stump you.
I know. So I'll tell you two things there, right? Everybody right now, if you see from practical, everybody is worried. What if I need that in the future, right? So I will anonymize data. I will not delete data. So they're not deleting it except few people. But ideally we should delete it, because I'll tell you my own theory about deletion, right? If you don't remember, if you something you have it, it's not going to be useful in the future, right? So no matter what, right? And there are a lot of stuff in terms of the duplicate copies and stuff like that. So I think deletion is mandatory. But I'll tell you what you are saying from RTBF perspective, what we do, right? So there are two things. So we can actually automate your deletion process, right, from the backend. So we'll have a connector to your the data, either your files or your databases, right? The key thing, we can do that in two. If you trust us for deletion, absolutely, we'll go ahead and delete that, right? In whatever data store it is in, and we will be a tool to do that. But there is also interesting way of RTBF we can enforce on. First of all, what we do is we will generate the individual certificate. So say, for example, I deleted data of Samir or Alexis or Harvey or David, right? You will have basically this particular data elements were deleted and stuff like that. That's number one. Number two, if you wanna follow your internal deletion process, and I completely understand that because you have those big tools, right, which can take care of that. So do that with that, but use our tool to go ahead and verify that, right? So say, for example, some data is there. If you delete some file, we can go and basically confirm that that file is not that anymore, and third-party tool called Ardent, right, or Turtle Shield actually verified that. So those kind of Ashley medicine story, you have a regulator, a proof of what you are doing. And that is a tremendous, what do you call, from workflow standpoint, it's a very complex process, right? Currently, I don't think we are paying attention. So those are the things we play from our tool perspective. Roles.
Interesting, because the reason why I asked that, because in most large organization, you would have to discover the information, which the tool does a very good job of doing, and then bring it back to like a record management organization, right, to determine whether there's any specific legal hole. So even when you look at some of the legal basis for processing information on the GDPR, even though you may have a right to hold that data, that legal basis could have changed, right? So that's why the whole conversation around data minimization is very important to articulate to the organization. So I always try to lead by the concept, don't collect more than what you're needed, right? Typically you fill out requests to they ask for more information than is required to either do the job or other type of activities. And if we take that approach that only collect what is required, so you only collect what is required from that individual or for the customers. You know, I always use the going to the store or department store to buy something, right, where they ask you for that, they ask you for your zip code. And it has now become a tradition where individuals assume that the asking of that zip code is a part of that credit card transaction. And it is not, because if you make one up, you do realize that the transactions still go through, right? But that is just a better way for them to kind of identify that later through data mapping and processes as well. And I think when you look at the whole DPIA process, you know, most organizations today, not only do they not know what type of sensitive data that they house, the other concern is that they don't know who they're sharing it with. So majority of the regulation is now going for you to have to be able to say, not only are you collecting my customer data and processing it, who are you sharing it with? And we've seen even at the FTC level, we've seen a lot of those regulation that has recently come down, or enforcement around application that collect data, process that information, but in turn turn around and sharing it to others, anonymized or unanonymized, right? Research would indicate that any data that is truly anonymized is not usable, because you need to leave some marker to be able to go back and use the anonymized data. And it is an issue, because people try to skirt the law by thinking, yeah, I can just anonymize it, I can remove most of the data identifiers, and then I can now reuse that data. And we all know that is impossible, because research have shown that if you use 2 or 3 identifiers, almost like 87% of the US population could be identified, right? So if you have to leave 1 or 2 and you give it to a data broker, you're in challenge. I remember a couple of years ago when I was at the EU, when GDPR was being launched, we were at EDPS and we were having conversation with the regulators there on, how do you regulate data brokers, right? What is the process around that? And one of the things you realize is there's a lot of companies for which we don't do business with, but they host a lot of information on us. They can tell you how old your kids are, what kind of Pampers you like, the last time you bought prenatal. So your whole life is being told through these identifiers that they use for you as a customer. And I think the regulation is slowly trying to catch up, because the technology continues to stay ahead of that.
No, absolutely. It's a complex problem, right? I'll just, George, just 1 second here. So I think it's a complex problem, again, the whole thing, right? And even if regulators are saying that, doing that at the whole, but I'll say anonymization can be myth a lot of times. And I've actually went through all the, I'll tell you one little story about anonymization. The largest healthcare agency, right? 64% of American is insured by Medicare and Medicaid, if people don't know, right? So that's a very interesting fact, that 65% is actually a public healthcare we are covered by. Only 35% or what, or maybe 10%, maybe uninsured. I don't know what that number is, but they are by Blue Cross Blue Shield and the major insurance. So private insurance is not that big in terms of, maybe transaction wise, but 64 or 65% of America is covered by Medicare and Medicaid. Having said that, when I used to work with them, the anonymization, right? When they did anonymization, I used to get a request every year that, hey, can we put this production data in the validation testing and all those environment, right? And I said, why? And can we get the exception for that? Why? Because anonymization did not work. They had something, right? They had something in which works perfectly in the testing. It basically bombs in production, right? Doesn't work in production. So we need to do that in the validation environment and do that. So what I'm saying is we need to be practical, right? Because if you are spending so much time and energy on anonymization, right? Rather just keep and secure whatever you have and delete what you don't need, or make another copy of that. Basically do whatever you, because if we are losing value of data, right? Why do you even keep that? So it's a different, right? In some cases like Google Maps and stuff, the way they do traffic, which is good, but I think anonymization should be used very carefully. A lot of people we are dodging the security controls due to that. But anyway, Josh, please, next question.
Samir, thanks for doing this for us today. I appreciate it. I want to give everybody, again, a quick 5 minutes before we jump into our next section, which is kind of a panel discussion. And I have a couple of top news items I wanted to cover, privacy news items, and that I didn't get around to covering this morning because I got on my ransomware soapbox. So let's take a quick 5 minutes. We'll be back at 5 minutes after the hour. And I really appreciate everybody being on. And thank you again, Samir, for that. So we'll see y'all in,
absolutely.
See you in 5 minutes. Thank you. So welcome back, everybody. Again, Ted Sherrill, Harvey Nusz with y'all today on our ISACA Greater Houston Chapter Privacy Saturday session. Feel free to share these with anyone you would like to invite or bring on. Again, they occur the 4th Saturday of every month from 9 a.m. to noon Central Time. So appreciate y'all joining with us. And you do get a half a CPE for every 30 minutes that you participate in. If you can only join us for an hour, that's okay. You'll still get one CPE for that hour. But we'd love to have everybody for the entire time if you're able to join. So I did want to share real quick, as I had a few slides built for this morning that I kind of got off on my soapbox, so I didn't get to go over them with everyone. And before we get into our panel discussion, but these are some pretty, I felt like some pretty important points that affect privacy, cyber insurance, et cetera. So, so this one here was a recent ruling just for a pittance amount of $1.4 billion. This was a battle going between Merck and their insurance companies, indemnifiers, over a NotPetya cyber attack. And the insurance companies were claiming they were not going to have to pay because this was an act of war. And I especially put it up because they were part of a conflict with Ukraine, which is still pertinent today, of course. And the courts ruled that their language precluding that was meant to apply to armed conflict. So they found in Merck's favor. So at least for the time being, unless it's appealed, it looks like the insurance companies are going to have to pay out approximately $1.4 billion to Merck to help them recover from that breach. So since it involved Ukraine and just make sure you check your contracts, and you want to, God forbid you have a breach and you have to try to collect from an insurance company. You want to make sure that you've read all the fine print and you're in good standing on that, because there are a lot of nation state attacks. So, and I would expect from this that maybe the wording would change going forward so that it would not just reference or be interpreted to reference armed conflict. That's one reason I brought it up. So be careful to look at your wording on these contracts that, going forward. So another one is just to let you know, there is a new bill that's introduced. I don't know if it'll pass, but it bans surveillance advertising. So, and I'll put the links to these out in chat if you want to read them and find out more information on them. But I did want to point this out and and make sure you were aware of it. So again, it's talking about legislation to ban what they consider to be a toxic business model to cause irreparable harm to customers, business, et cetera. And it's about using your personal information to do targeted advertising, et cetera. You notice up here, the bill also prohibits advertisers from targeting ads based on protected class information, such as race, gender, religion, personal data purchased from data brokers, et cetera. The bill makes explicit the contextual advertising, which is advertising based on the content a user is engaging with, is allowable. So just be aware of that, but this is a big change if this goes through. So in my opinion, so that would, and who knows if it is to pass, who knows what it'll look like exactly when it does pass. But just wanted to make y'all aware that that was a new bill that's been introduced. Another one, and this is, obviously a big topic for privacy. A federal judge in New York dismissed a potential class action against Marsh and McLennan, who are insurance brokers, as y'all probably know. It was brought by two former employees who sued the firm after a data breach was suffered. And what the judge cited was that currently in Florida and New York, if you look here, the Southern District of New York, the judge found that they were not able to specifically show the damages must be capable of proof with reasonable certainty and not merely speculative, and they must be proximately caused by the defendant. This was our old privacy rules, if you will. Now California, Virginia, and other states are citing that you do not specifically have to show that you were damaged from the breach itself. This has been, I just put it up because in many states, this is still the case, and it kind of has been the lay of the land that you had to specifically show that the breach caused you monetary harm. But the new privacy regulations, as y'all know, are not holding to that level of requirement that you have to show that. The fact that your data is breached is, and again, I'm not an attorney, but in general, in some of the new privacy regulations, the fact that your data is breached does constitute harm, whether or not you specifically can show the financial harm that occurred from it. So just wanted to show this because it does matter where you live and where a case is brought. And I have a hunch that had the residents or the employees been residents of California, this might have been a different outcome. But so just
Ted, to your case in that one, there have been some legal stuff that occurred last year as well in reference to the CCPA, where counsel has been trying to challenge the basis for CCPA, where you need to show that explicitly that it was done to you, right? And it personally caused harm to you, not that the fact that your data was a part of a breach, right? But someone maliciously used that data that was part of that breach and you were personally infected. So
Correct.
I think that's a slippery slope we'll see. Go ahead.
It
Dave.
is, I mean, is everybody else on the same page with me that the thought would be that if your data is breached, it's kind of like the Log4j, vulnerability. It's like, okay, so nothing's happened today. Well, who's to say it's not going to happen in 6 months or 6 years? I mean, that's a loaded gun. It doesn't have to shoot now to be dangerous. So at least that's my thought.
And it could be compromised even without you knowing, right? So are they going
Right,
to now,
absolutely.
is the court going to now say that you need to have the capability to go now determine once you've been identified that you're part of a breach to go investigate and see, okay, was my information, do I need to go do search in the dark web, look for my data, as a customer, are you now passing the onus onto me? It's like passing the responsibility for the breach onto the customer now from the people who's collecting and processing your data, which I think is kind of ludicrous from a long-term strategy, but it's eventually going to get shut down. But it's coming, and that's what the attorneys will continue to kind of walk close to that line.
no, exactly. So I just wanted to cover some of those, and again, I'll put the links.
Yeah,
Thank you for sharing those. That was
think
really informative and helpful.
Yeah.
yes, it was. I think we also need to keep in mind, or against as consumers, if it takes a company, 6 months to a year and a half, with all the resources that these entities have to discover a breach within their own walls, and the resource, like I say, the resources that they have as an individual to discover where you have been compromised is even more of a challenge, because you don't have control over where that information sits and how you are able to see it. Because so that's again going to be the challenge, and I'm interested to see as more and more court filings are done and been presented, how they address that piece. Again, putting it back on the individual user.
Kevin, also remember that the challenge within that statement is the fact that some of those companies are only conveying that information about the breach because there's probably regulatory requirements, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah. They're not volunteer. They're not jumping up
no,
and saying,
not at all.
"Hey, by the way, Mr. Customer, we've been breached, and some of your information or all of your information, or whatever the case may be, is no longer within our control." They're not going to jump at their opportunity to do that. And we all sit in those discussions where they're bobbing back and forth of, do we really have to tell? Don't tell unless we absolutely show me in the regulation where it explicitly says we must disclose this.
But they also like to tell you that there was no, when I read those statements, what get me is we don't have any reason to believe that that information has been misused. Right? That lines always get me that's attorneys.
Minimize the impact,
Like 300 million accounts,
profit,
but no one has misused it.
Yes, absolutely. Hey, it's only a couple million. Hey, we got millions that weren't breached. So anyway.
Exactly.
Conversation.
No, I appreciate it. So Harvey, I'll turn it back over to you and we can transition over into the panel discussion. Harvey, can you hear me?
Are you speaking on mute, Harvey?
Yes, sorry, I did have some issues there, so thank you, no worries. And I think this has been some wonderful discussion, it always is. So let me bring in a couple of other panel members who have joined us for this hour and let them introduce themselves and then have some opening comments as to some things to talk about, and then I'll go to others around the room. Joe, let me start with you first. Joe Bracken, CPO of Informatica. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. Tell me if my audio is okay, by the way, because normally when I do these, I'm in front of a microphone in my office. Thank you. And I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we got snow, which my children are delighted with, but for all us adults, yet again. As Harvey said, I am the Chief Privacy Officer and Deputy General Counsel at Informatica. I'm responsible for intellectual property, product-related matters, and litigation, and relevant for this conversation, data privacy. There are a lot of, I think, good topics to talk about. If we're talking about sort of what the risks are that we should be aware of, I think this is a good time to have a conversation like this, because as you probably know, there are a lot of regulations that are coming into force here in the next 12 months, right? The CPRA is going to come into force. The Virginia law, the CDPA is going to come into force, and then we have a number of things in early 2023 as well. So this is a good time to really start preparing. Ted also brought up in the articles that he just showed some issues that I had not planned to talk about, but I think are really important, right? The cyber insurance market is becoming much more expensive. And my company recently went through getting a new policy, and that insurance is sort of lubricating the wheels of business. And if that becomes prohibitively expensive because of the ransomware attacks and Log4j issues, suddenly it becomes more difficult for some companies to continue to carry on doing business. I also hadn't planned to talk about the cookie market, but obviously this is really big too, right? There's news we can talk about coming out of Europe. I think the French Data Protection Authority, CNIL, has issued some big fines recently on, I think it was Google and Facebook for non-compliance with their cookie guidelines. And so even in the absence of some US federal legislation, there are a lot of things that suggest that probably the era of cookies is over, and we're going to have to come up with some new business models for web content. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Excellent, very good, thank you. And let me also introduce another new panelist, a good friend of mine, Dr. Dayanan with Lone Star College. He produced the cybersecurity program there, and I'm not expecting you, Daya, to have any opening comments. If you have some, that's fine, but otherwise I'd just be happy to let you introduce yourself and then join in the conversation as we continue. Thank you, Daya.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Harvey, for bringing me into this wonderful panel today. First of all, I want to apologize for showing up late. I've been teaching. It's not fun to teach on Saturday, but yeah, I was teaching. I had a class 9 to 12, and I had to just come and join this session. So yeah, I just moved to Houston 2 years ago, started this program from the scratch with the Lone Star College with the 0 students. Today, now when I'm talking with you, we have a 200 students enrolled with this program. We hired 5 more professors to take care of that, but it's exploding. Yeah, so that's a little about me. I am also working on a ransomware right now, and sometime we'll learn from Harvey about data privacy, which is the most important thing. Yeah, so I won't say anything because I joined a little late and I missed that conversation. About the insurance, I'll comment one thing quickly. That I was watching this a webinar, and there was a question somebody asked that when you have a ransomware attack, how hackers determine that how much money they should be asking for the company. The quick answer somebody gave said that, well, they look at your insurance, that how much insurance did you buy? So they know $5 million, at least we can get $5 million from this company. so insurance is really good, but it's helping to those bad actors to determine how much money you are capable to pay, so yeah. So I'll stop here, and again, thank you so much for welcoming me and letting me join, letting me talk. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And just to make just to kind of put an exclamation point on your point about hackers wanting to find out, how much they should. I think it was with another association, a lady was talking about her experience in a ransomware attack and all of that. And she said she knows for darn sure now that they were in her system. They saw that they were about to get cyber insurance, and they waited until they signed the papers on the cyber insurance before they did the ransomware attack. So thank you, welcome. And
they asked for the exact amount of the insurance policy.
Exactly, yes. Lisa Rogers and
Right.
and you and she talked about that as well.
Yeah.
And ransomware is going to unfortunately continue to be another continuing topic.
Yeah, and we did a.
What if you don't have insurance?
That they would know also.
To tell them we don't have insurance, right?
They may turn around and produce your own documents, right? That shows you do. So.
So the new challenge is, man, all these cyber insurance companies need to protect their databases, that how much they are insured for, right?
Right.
So yeah, otherwise they will hack that first.
Yeah. Exactly.
And I will make a plug here. We did a ransomware seminar series in November. It was a 4-part series, and I'll put the link for it out in the chat real quick. I did put the link, by the way, in chat for our YouTube Saturday privacy sessions. If you subscribe to that channel, then just like when today's session's being recorded, when I get it posted out there, you'll be notified of that. And so if you miss part of a session, or you want to go back and rewatch part of a session, or whatever, you can do that. If obviously if you miss a session or something, you can watch it on YouTube, and you can still receive CPE credit. We put a questionnaire, a short questionnaire for you to answer in the description there in the YouTube video. But going back to my point, I'll put out our ransomware webinar series that we did in November. We really had some great participants. Gartner, it was Booz Allen Hamilton and Marsh McLennan. It was a lot over cyber insurance. And we actually had a lot of the cyber insurers speak to the specific issues of ransomware and what they're doing from an indemnifier perspective. And then we also had, Varonis and Oracle and just several companies discuss how they're, what they're observing is best practices for preventive, detective, and especially recovery. And that's kind of how we broke the 4-part series out. The first one was just kind of an overview, a lay of the land. And then the next 3 were really around kind of preventive, detective, and recovery. And all of it tied back into how that works with your cyber insurer. So sorry for the long pitch there, but I'll put that link out in chat. So
yeah, this is George. I was curious about it. You mentioned earlier, is there going to be a seminar or anything about the issue about, you mentioned about acts of God or acts of war and about the Ukraine, everything. And you mentioned something about it could theoretically nullify the insurance?
yeah, in fact, I'll put that back up because that's what was being claimed. And let me put it back up real quick on my PowerPoint. I think that's it. So if we come back to this one here, that's what the indemnifiers were claiming over the NotPetya incident with Merck. But you know, a judge has you know, ruled in Merck's favor and said that their interpretation, a New Jersey Superior Court judge, Thomas Walsh, ruled on January 13th that Merck's insurers cannot claim the war exclusion because its language is meant to apply to armed conflict. So what I was saying was anticipate that this language in all the contracts is going to get clarified. You may even receive maybe an amendment to your existing contract. I don't know what all is allowed there, et cetera. I'm not an attorney, but I'm just saying this is what the indemnifiers were claiming, was that NotPetya was an act of war, and therefore their indemnification policy would excluded that. But the judge ruled that it was it only applied to armed conflict. Obviously, for 1.4 billion, I would not be surprised, you know, if this potentially got appealed, but I don't know if that meant it would have to go to the, you know, to the Supreme Court or something like that. I don't know what would be above the Superior Court there in New Jersey. But
Thank you.
But yeah, so it is an issue. But no, I'm not really planning. I wasn't planning on having a session on this. I was just drawing this out to say, make sure you look at the language in your contracts and be mindful of it, and that it may be changing due to this ruling.
Thank you. And I think that's a good issue. Let me just jump in really quickly. And Joe, I love you like a brother, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot. You don't have to say anything, but since you are the attorney in the room with privacy experience and cybersecurity, do you have any thoughts on that, sir? And if not, no worries.
I think Ted is right. So this was a big win, you know, pending appeal for Merck, right, for this particular policyholder, but it's going to be a very temporary win for all the rest of us policyholders, right? Because the insurers have the bargaining power. There are fewer insurers who are willing to write these sorts of policies, and you can bet that they will pay attention to a decision like this and write the contract in a way that protects them from future decisions. So I honestly don't know what industry standard is, but I'm sure that insurers are worried about this and they will intend to cover it.
I think that's
intend to exclude it.
Exactly. I think that's an excellent observation. So let me start in with a couple of comments, and want to get some discussion started in one area in just a minute. But first, without going into the details, let me just say that I believe that sessions like what we're doing here is very important. You need to really build up your network. You know, as a security guy, as a privacy lady, the whole area. And so there will come a time where you may be asked to provide a point of view, say on a particular, let's just say data localization coming out of the new China law. And if you don't have the legal resources like Joe and other folks to prepare a point of view on that, perhaps if you know someone who's already faced that in another industry, that could help you out fairly quickly. And then obviously you have to go in and do some more research again. But I just wanted to mention a benefit of networking with professionals like all of us on the panel and all of us listening. There's some very good, solid professionals out there. So just wanted to encourage you to continue networking. And I put something in the chat. We'd love to find out how we can make this more useful to you. So give us ideas. Do we want to focus on some risk out there, develop policy type language for something in a new area or something? Give us some ideas. And now one concern I am hearing is that I believe this is under CPRA when it comes into being, that when we get a request to delete, we're going to have to reach out to vendors and communicate that request to delete as well.
You're making me dizzy.
Say again, please.
You're making me dizzy.
I'm making you dizzy. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. I've been told that before, so it's a little test I have just to do to see who reacts first. No, I'm kidding. I apologize. So thank you. I probably should turn off my video, but that's fine. So basically, under CPRA, we've got the deal that we're going to have to reach out to vendors to say, hey, delete this person's information per his request. Then the question is, how do you know who to reach out to? And I think the obvious answer is you keep logs of where you shared the data, but I'd love to hear somebody with some more knowledge and experience in this speak to that. Anybody want to jump in? Or I'd be happy to ask for opinions.
Yeah, sure. So you identify the answer to a lot of the questions you're going to ask ends up being the same thing, that you really do need to have a good foundation of sort of a data map, right? To understand what data you hold, what you're doing with it, and what sometimes gets missed, who you're sharing it with, right? And this is sort of a practical requirement. Actually, I think it's an explicit requirement under Article 28 of the GDPR to track who you share it with.
Yes.
And I think most of us have been trying to do this manually, just using spreadsheets. As requirements get more complex, as our organizations handle more data, and I think all organizations are handling more data every year, that gets more and more difficult to do. There are a lot of tools. I think you've probably had vendors here at ISACA selling tools to help you build data map. But that becomes really important to have sort of good tools in place to track that sort of information, because otherwise you're just never going to be able to be sure that you're really complying.
Yeah, Joe.
Excellent. Go ahead, please, Ted.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And that is an excellent first step. And I just want to share a best practice I observed. I think Harvey and you and I have talking about this one-on-one before, but there was an organization I went to. It's a financial services firm talking about the data map. And the problem is, how do you keep this freight train from being a runaway freight train getting away from you? And what they did is they had a kind of an operations owner and a data owner, assigned to their systems where data was born. And if they chose to share that data, or it was requested that they share the data with another application or third party or whatever, then they had a form that was filled out that said, what's the business reason for sharing the data? How is it going to be used, et cetera. And they would then grant that approval. Along with that form, it cited that whoever they shared that data with, it could not be shared with another application or third party, et cetera, unless the original data owners of the application that it was born in granted approval, because that's ultimately where the consent and the intent, the data subject's intent for why they provided their data initially was granted. And the only people that can really determine is the data going to still be processed in a manner that the data subject intended it to be, would be the application that collected it in the first place. And this sounds simple, and they made it work, and it was, you know, if you get people to adhere to that policy, then, you know, and they did, then it worked very effectively. And they could show you where all of their data was born, which systems collected it, and then those data owners within those systems could show you all the data that data was being shared with, and what the business reason and the processing of that data in who they shared it with. And they had the ability to cancel that at any time that they chose to, if there was a need to, such as a right to erasure, et cetera. So Joe, great point. I just kind of wanted to talk about, you know, where I've seen that's, you have to have accountability and with that data, or if you just start spreading it and it just gets spread from one application to another, et cetera, and you lose context of how it's being processed, why it's being shared, where it's being shared, right? You have to think about cross-border data transfer, who's viewing the data, et cetera. Then all of that comes into play. So hopefully that helps, but great point, Joe.
So in that situation, Ted, do you think there was I can see the benefit of that aiding that DPIA process, right, for a third party in terms of where the data is shared. But the additional follow-up to that would be, do we have a process in place to verify or audit that third party for which you've now shared the data with, that secondary usage is not occurring, right?
Right.
Because you may have that within language that speaks to that they should not be sharing it with anyone beyond it so that the purpose is maintained or processing. But do we have a way of either verifying that, or is there a process that we follow?
Yeah, so
they need to attest to that?
This organization, they put a governance process in place, and it depended upon the level of how often that occurred was determined by the quantity of data that was shared along with the sensitivity of the data, and they calculated a risk score. And it could be that you had to verify that every 3 months or 6 months, or at the most 1 year. And again, that was determined by the risk score based on who they shared it with. But great point. And absolutely, they wanted continual validation that was still needed, and it was still being processed in the manner that they had shared that it was being processed, that there was no, in the questionnaire that they sent out, it would ask, has there been any new AI processes turned on for this data? Things like that would have, that they would need to know about concerning that data.
Because I would be concerned, sorry, George, I would be concerned with the ability to rescind that request and for that third party to now assure them that they're no longer processing that data going forward as well. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems I ever ran across in working with the federal government as a contractor was the fact that the government bureaucrats could do this data sharing, and they were always startled when you produce a data map for them. It's like, can we have that? Can we keep that? Yeah, well, okay. But the other part was in the federal government, particularly, I guess this happens in state governments too, is you have a contractor come in for a year or more, maybe they got a 5-year contract, and then they would lose it. And you couldn't guarantee that they had deleted the data. In other words, the government can guarantee it, but the contractor who owned the data for a period of time, unless it was on a cloud or something else, you really couldn't get a legal statement or anything from them to say, okay, we've lost the contract, so we don't care about your data. We got rid of it. And you really would need a signed document. We had a hard time getting that in the federal government. Just a heads up.
No, I think it's a good point. I do,
Well,
Joe.
that's not limited.
I'm sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
I was saying that's not limited to the federal government. You have the same challenges in private sector as well. When you are, again, you have these, it doesn't have to be a large company. It could be a small company or medium-sized company as well. As you are sharing information, you have data repositories or systems that have hundreds of interfaces, internal, external, where they are sharing information or capturing information. When you're dealing with a third party, the contracts that are in place in most instances do not address the destruction of data and the certification of data. It's either, if it is addressed, it's ambiguous with no controls. So just making the request to a third party gives you no guarantee that they will execute that request. Second part to that is these companies or some of these companies may also have that same customer or user in their own repository. And then how do they, if they don't have similar or mature controls, differentiate where they got the data from? Did they get the data from their own originating sources, or did they get the data from you? And again, their ability to follow through in that process, gets lost in the process of controls.
Yeah, I think this whole conversation is focusing our attention on where the biggest risks really are, right? Which is our vendor ecosystems. That we might have a lot of internal processing activities, but it's orders of magnitude more that our vendors have, right? And this was an issue for essentially every enterprise before the CPRA added this term, right? There are a number of ways that you've got to look at this, right? One, obviously, is contracts, as Kevin was just talking about. You've got to have the terms in place with the vendors to make sure that you have the audit rights, to make sure that they're committed to use good security. And that can be very difficult, right? It's easy to say that, but vendors don't want to spend a lot of time negotiating every contract with everybody. They want you to accept their terms, which they wrote for their benefit, right? And usually they're good enough to meet the law, perhaps, but they're not going to be a whole lot better than that. You're going to have questionnaires, and sending those manual questionnaires requires a lot of work, right? There are, again, tools in place that can sort of automate the questionnaires you send to vendors and even analyze the feedback that you get. But that's a lot of work. And there's kind of balancing having a really good program against the bureaucracy and the effort that you're imposing on the rest of the business when you do this. In my experience, it's sort of a constant negotiation, right? You've got to make the case internally as to why these risks exist and why you need resources to try to control them. But this is something that I think we're all, if we haven't faced up to it now, we're all going to have to face up to, that our vendors really need a lot of attention.
No, I think it's a great point. Joe, I'm curious, since you're a CPO, what do you think in 2022? Do you have any thoughts or suggestions on or thoughts about what are the biggest issues you think CPOs are dealing with in 2022?
Well, so we are going to be essentially reaching out to almost all of our service providers because there's a data transfer. I don't know how familiar the audience here is with data transfer rules, but there's been a lot of uncertainty around data transfers lately. Any transfer of European personal data is typically done under what are called the standard contractual clauses. New standard contractual clauses came out about 6 months ago. All transfers even existing ones, have to be under those by December 27th. So that's probably a reason that you're going to have to reach out to all of your vendors. Most of them will probably have sort of an easy way to put the new ones in place. If not, you're going to have to negotiate something kind of custom with each vendor. It's more of a paperwork exercise, but there are some appendices at the end that you're going to have to take care of. What are some of the big issues that a CPO would need to worry about? I think one risk is complacency. If we spent a lot of time putting good systems in place for compliance with European law, with California law, it's tempting to look at the changes to California, to look at the new laws in Virginia and Colorado and think, we're probably good enough. And depending on how much time you have, I guess you probably could take that approach, but there really are new requirements that we're going to have to take care of. There are new things you're going to have to put in your privacy policy. And while that seems like a small matter, it ends up being the most visible one. There are efforts right now by people like Max Schrems, by the California CPPA, that are essentially just looking at privacy policies and looking for non-compliance. So you've got to be sharp on things like that. What else? If you use cookies, we talked about this at the beginning of the call. I think if you don't have a cookie consent management tool in place, you're probably going to have one. And it's possible that, in fact, it will be so unappealing to have to put something on your website that says, hey, click here if you want us to stop sharing your personal information, that a lot of companies are going to decide that they just don't want to deal with
opt
cookies.
in, opt out. Yeah.
Right. You know, that's the differences between both of our approaches, right, in terms of regulation. I think what you're seeing coming out of the whole SHEM 2 and GDPR direction is the whole fact that a lot of these companies are dropping the cookies before, even if you have the consent, right? Having the consent on the page is pretty good, but having the ability to block the cookies from being dropped in the first place is much better, right? Because even though you have a policy and you have the cookie banner at the bottom of the page, is not going to protect the fact that you've already dropped a cookie when I get there the first time. So a lot of the conversation that we're having with those clients is, you know, when you get into that space, when you start talking about cookies in its original form now is going to go away. But you've seen, I'm have more concern about API integration and SDKs that are still developing software for which that geolocation information is being shared, right? So I think the next 2 to 3 years, we'll see a big push within those space, and cookies, you know, that organization going to have to step up. Just showing up the policies is not going to be an appropriate action when you don't even have the ability for someone to do a DSAR. And then when you start doing a DSAR, if you're not in California or Virginia or Chicago that have different type of stuff around biometrics, an organization could just not respond to you, right? Because there's no regulation. So everyone think that, oh yeah, I can just do a DSAR, but if you're not in those places for which a regulation exists now, companies gonna ignore you or just, you know, do business best practice, knowing that eventually it's gonna come to their state and they're gonna have to follow those regulations. So everyone is jumping on board.
Can I ask a question? While we have some lawyers and such on and privacy people, is there a new career path for like a commercial version of the Freedom of Information Act personnel versus trying to get the lawyer to do all the work? I would think there would be an assistant positioning opening up in all major companies for the Freedom of Information Act, because it would it's similar to the way the government does it, the federal government.
I don't know how to address that. Who does? Go ahead.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of privacy professionals who are not lawyers, but they really work in privacy, not in security exactly. And I'm probably many people on the call are like that. I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow is it an analogy you're making to FOIA, or do you mean it's actually someone who's making FOIA requests?
In terms of IAPP and other certifications, there really isn't a good career path for people that are going to have to meet these incredible things. The legal office and HR are not going to be able to handle some of this stuff, I think, from what I'm hearing. My personal experience was they don't have enough people to do what you're asking them to do theoretically.
Well,
the data mapping and all that.
One comment I'll make on that too, and it's just kind of a side note, and Joe, I'm sure, can speak to this a lot better than I can, but I do know when you talk about Freedom of Information Act, or what I would call, you know, e-discovery, things like that, that whole, what is considered protected communications, you know, is really evolving, and there's a lot of court cases ruling on that. So, you know, as to what discovery can cover and what is protected information. And so I'm just going to say, in my opinion, based on that, George, and I know that's not your sole question, but around discovery and all that, it's absolutely a legal question, because I've seen several court cases that where information that the organization, the corporation thought was protected is being allowed to be discovered. So you have to be very careful how you handle your protected information and communications, and that varies by state and all that, of course. But anyway, I just wanted to address that.
Yeah.
I'll add to that on George's question. Over the last month or two, I've been going through the process of looking for a different opportunity. But one of the things that I've noticed more than anything is the real issue with Company A seeking, traditional title in security or privacy, and those responsibilities and expectations and requirements. I mean, like, just in a different world than Company B with the same title. And one of the things I'm starting to see recently is a lot of new titles, a lot of new positions, really better descriptions too. I mean, it's not as frequent as it should be or as anybody would like it to be, but some of the companies are really making progress in that. And for example, people, requiring privacy professional certification. Like that's, I mean, I'm seeing that a lot more. And I think that's really encouraging that, some of these HR groups are really recognizing that. I know there's several projects going on right now with NICE, a component of NIST that is working on kind of creating a better, a more distinct and standard set of titles and responsibilities to provide companies and HR to help with that whole process. Because what you're talking about is, yeah, it's a whole job in its own, but there's nobody, they're not hiring anybody for it. So I think you are seeing the creation of that.
I think what I've seen in the market is that I've seen that blending, right? So like in my experience, I come from a technical background, have an IT experience. My doctoral study was in privacy, and I'm thinking about going to law school for the fun of it. Because I think there's a good mix in terms of what we bring as privacy professional to that conversation, right? So I spent a lot of time talking to lawyers, obviously, in multiple different forms. And one of the things that I've seen is, I think there's a blending of both, right? Where I see the legal framework can be able to come to that stuff, but an attorney have to be able to understand the technical stuff behind cookies and other things outside of what is a legal representation, right? And I think you'll see a transition of that, at least for the next 5 years. There's going to be a lot of work within this space. So I think when the professional who's in the audit and security and governance role, it allows you to easier get into the privacy space. But I think understand that legal background, or having that what Joseph and a general counsel would bring, because when they sit you down and ask you, you remember from your days, you don't say more than what you're asked for. You don't give all the hypotheticals of how you can get into the system. You just say, what does the event show, right? So I think the opportunity is good within the field for the next 4 to 5 years.
What's I think the most important thing is having sort of at least enough technical understanding to be in the conversation, so that when you talk to the technologists, you understand what they're saying, and a willingness to educate yourself on the issues, right? Because honestly, whether you have a law degree or not, essentially everything that Ed and I and any other attorneys on the phone here have learned about privacy has been after law school, right? You have to be able to actually read a regulation, or at least be able to read the summaries on IAPP to understand what you're doing. I want to follow up on one point that Ted made that I thought was actually really important, and it may affect the people on this call. So when a company has a data breach, they will often bring in some outside consultant to investigate the data breach, try to figure out the cause. It's very important that that report remain attorney-client privileged, right? It is going to have a lot of smoking guns in a sense. It is going to be a roadmap to everything that company did wrong. And there was a court case, and this may be what Ted was referring to. There have been a number of them, but I think the most prominent was called Capital One. I think it was last year. And that that report was held to not be attorney-client privilege and had to be turned over to the plaintiffs, which is just sort of a devastating outcome in a litigation. The reason why, they made some sort of practical mistakes there. They shared the report too widely. But definitely your companies are or should be renegotiating their contracts with these service providers to make sure that, for example, a new SOW is put into place and it's clearly between that service provider and legal, and that report is only provided to legal. What that might mean is that the information shared with you won't be directly from that service provider. It will probably be sort of filtered through legal, and you will get certain factual information without all the conclusions. It's going to be a little more overhead. It'll be a little more expense for the companies, and it's not very convenient, but it ends up being very important if you have a breach and you're staring down the possibility of litigation.
Thank you very much, Joe. I'm going to jump in here just really quickly. I know we've got about 5 minutes. I will take an action to start looking at paths into data privacy, and George and David would like to reach out to both of y'all and have you reach out to me. Let's talk about that. And I've got another subject area of discussion just for the last 5 minutes, but Joe, if you've got some other thoughts, I think Ted had a great question for you in terms of, from a CPO's point of view, what's top of mind? What are the pain points for this year? And some of the other, and you mentioned you better take a look at what's different in the Virginia Act, CBDPA, and different in the Colorado Act. And I'm not asking you to enumerate that, but just some other thoughts. So we'd love to hear them. Thank you.
And I know we're short on time. Let me go through a couple ideas quickly. And these are particularly relevant to me because my company is a B2B SaaS company that does a lot of data integration and data management. One big issue that I think is relevant for all SaaS vendors, or even any customer of a SaaS vendor, is the vendor's ability to reuse data for their own purposes, right? The CCPA has some language saying that they can use that data to, among other things, improve their services. The GDPR, I think it's always been more difficult because processors can only use data on the documented instructions from their customer, the controller. France came out with some guidelines on when that processor can use data in compliance with the GDPR. They can, but the terms are fairly difficult. In particular, the controller is going to have to inform the data subjects, which may be somewhat unpleasant. And it can't be just a general authorization. It needs to be pretty specific. Data transfers continues to be a big deal. We've sort of been on the knife's edge now for a couple of years, and unfortunately, we're still there. There was just a decision from the Austrian DPA that said Google Analytics was sending data back to the US, and that was held to be a violation. Essentially, Google, the DPA said that Google could not protect that data in compliance with European laws because it was subject to essentially US government surveillance. And Google was relying on arguments that honestly most of the industry relies on and are held to be pretty convincing, that the data is encrypted. They have never received any government access requests for this type of data. It's not the kind of data they're interested in. But nevertheless, that transfer was found to be illegal. If that logic extends widely, I think, again, data transfers are probably in a lot of trouble. One other issue, and it may not actually come to a fore in 2022, but definitely it's being worked on, privacy requirements for artificial intelligence. So this is being worked on in a lot of forums right now. There's a NIST concept paper out that's pretty good on it. The most important document right now is a draft EU Artificial Intelligence Act, and it does a pretty good job of sort of categorizing the risks and what the requirements are for each risk level. But it's really to be determined what final form that's going to look like and whether Europe will be able to sort of effectively impose their will on the rest of the world, or if in fact they just sort of put themselves at a disadvantage in developing this kind of technology. So those are three issues I'm thinking of that certainly affect a company in my area and probably affect a lot of your companies as well.
That's tremendous.
Biometrics data.
I'm sorry, just let me apologize, Alexis, just 1 second. What was the name of that AI Act, Joe?
I think it's called the Artificial Intelligence Act.
And
it's just draft right now.
Put out by
I think EDPS, I have a copy of it. Harvey, I'll try to forward it to you.
Excellent. Okay, we can share it with everybody. Get it? No, thank you. And please, Alexis, please continue.
Yeah, it was the question I
minutes, yeah.
had for Joe was around where you're seeing a lot of the direction on biometrics. I know Chicago has a great strong regulation around that. There is some stuff that's coming out from CPRA around biometrics data and how we're going to protect that long term.
Yeah, that continues to be a big area. I think Washington has been a state that has been close to having a privacy, like a fairly comprehensive privacy law passed. And it seems like it's actually regulation of biometric data that continues to sort of get in the way of getting that over the finish line. Biometric data, I believe, is included among the sensitive personal information that is now introduced into California law through the CPRA. So it's going to require, and I think that's right. Maybe I'll Google it.
Yeah, I think that's
before we
correct.
get off the call just to make sure. If that's correct, that means that you will need actual consent to process it in California data subjects. So yeah, I think that's another area where kind of it hasn't yet shaken out, but for sure there's going to be a lot of arguing over biometric data.
Yeah, New York have an explicit one that they're working through already for the state legislation. You need to get that explicit consent as opposed to just assuming that it's covered.
Hey, Harvey, it's Ted. I know we're short on time, but did we get, I don't know if I gave Daya a chance to make any comments, so.
That was my fault, but please, thank you. And I'm going to say, Daya, we'd love to have you make comments. We're getting you involved in here. We'd love to hear them. Don't expect it, but would love to hear whatever you have to say. And thank you, and thanks to everyone else too. But thank you, Daya. Please.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Go ahead, Daya, if you're still on. If you have any comments you'd like to make before we close out.
No, I think I would just extend my gratitude. Thank you so much for letting me join in. And yeah, whatever we talk, data privacy, everything is connected with the security. So yeah, I'm just looking at that framework. Yeah, but I won't take anybody's time. We are almost over the time. Yeah, maybe next session. Yeah, but thank you so much for letting me speak. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Daya, and thanks, Joe and Kevin and Alexis and just George, all the people that communicated today, and of course, thank you, extreme big thanks to Harvey for his contributions today, and I'll close out. And Harvey, can you track my cookie here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'd like to track it firsthand, but I can't. So as long as it's not poisonous, I'm good. I just saw a movie on that, but go ahead.
Exactly. So anyway, thank you, everybody.